Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Harryverse X, presenting to you today, Satoru Gojo rescued Harry from cupboard age 5 and Infinite Void technique merged with Elder Wand. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Cosmos. The cursed spirit smelled like burnt copper and old grief. Gojo had been tracking it for 3 days across continental Europe, which was impressive mostly because cursed spirits didn't typically bother with international travel. They were creatures of emotional residue, born from the slow accumulation of human fear in places where fear had been allowed to pool and fester undisturbed. They didn't pack bags. They didn't cross the channel. Whatever had dragged this one from its origin point in a crumbling psychiatric facility outside of Cologne all the way to the quiet, aggressively normal suburbs of Surrey, England, was something with a pull strong enough to move the unmovable. Gojo had theories. He usually did. He just hadn't expected the answer to be a row of identical beige houses. He landed, if you could call what Gojo did landing, since it was more of a decision to allow gravity to become relevant again, on the pavement of Privet Drive at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in October, 1991. The street was the kind of quiet that came not from peace but from enforced sameness. Every lawn was the same length. Every curtain was drawn at the same angle. Even the streetlights seemed to be performing their illumination in a careful, inoffensive way, as though frightened of casting shadows that might disturb someone. He pushed his sunglasses up his nose and looked around. The cursed spirit's trail ended here. Not faded, not dissipated, ended, like a thread that had been cut. Something on this street had consumed it, or absorbed it, or simply been so fundamentally overwhelming that the spirit's resonance had been swallowed whole by a larger, stranger frequency. Gojo tilted his head. There it was. He'd felt powerful cursed energy before. He'd been marinating in it his entire life, had, in fact, generated more of it than any sorcerer in 400 years. He knew the texture of strong cursed energy the way a musician knows the timbre of a particular instrument. Yaga had power like a controlled blaze. Nanami's was like a wall, dense, immovable, built from a kind of resigned professionalism that Gojo had always found secretly impressive. His own was, by all accounts, like standing next to a star. What was coming from the third house on the left, number 4, was something he didn't have a reference for. It wasn't cursed energy, exactly. Not entirely. It was something adjacent to it, something that shared the same emotional DNA, born from the same human capacity for feeling that gave cursed energy its shape, but structured differently. Wilder. Less refined. Like comparing a finished blade to raw ore that had never been touched by a forge but was already sharper than anything you'd ever held. And it was coming from somewhere very small. Very low to the ground. Gojo walked up the garden path. He didn't knock on the front door. He stood in the small space between the house and the neatly trimmed hedge and looked at the side of the building, where a tiny, high, rectangular window sat near ground level, almost invisible beneath the stairs that ran up the front of the house from the outside. He crouched down. The window was the size of a shoebox lid. Through the smudged glass he could make out darkness, and in the darkness, a shape that was unmistakably a child's body, curled on something thin, knees drawn to chest, entirely still. The child was asleep. Gojo stayed crouched for a moment that was longer than he would ever admit to anyone. He pressed one hand flat against the side of the house, and through the concrete and brick and years of accumulated ordinary life he felt the cursed, no, the magical energy coming off this child like heat from an oven left on too long, sourceless and constant and completely unaware of itself. The spirit hadn't been drawn here. It had been pulled here. There was a difference. He stood up, walked around to the front door, and knocked 3 times. The sounds inside the house were immediate and telling. A heavy thud of someone large rolling out of bed. Muttered cursing. The slap of large feet on stairs. Gojo stood with his hands in his pockets and his head tilted at the angle that meant he was mildly curious about what would happen next. The door opened to reveal a very large man with very little neck, wearing a mustard-yellow dressing gown that had clearly been designed for someone of normal human proportions and was doing its best under difficult circumstances. He had a face built for suspicion, small eyes, large jaw, the kind of permanent frown that came from spending a lifetime searching for things to disapprove of and never being disappointed. He looked at Gojo. He took in the white hair, the black clothes, the bandaged eyes behind the round white sunglasses, the general impression of someone who had never once in their life considered whether they were bothering anyone. "It's midnight," the man said. "It's 11:52, Gojo said. "Close, though. You've got a good internal clock. What do you want?" "If you're selling something, I'm not selling anything." Gojo glanced past the man into the hallway. Spotless. A row of photographs on the wall, a large blonde boy at various stages of looking pleased with himself, a round-faced woman smiling with the particular brightness of someone performing happiness for the camera, the large man himself at what appeared to be a drill company awards dinner. No photographs of anyone with dark hair. No photographs of anyone small and unsmiling who didn't quite fit. "I'm here about the child under your stairs." The silence that followed was very specific. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know what you were talking about. It was the silence of someone who had been found out and was in the process of deciding which lie would work best, and Gojo had been reading people since he was 6 years old, and he knew the difference. "I don't know what you," the man started. "Vernon Dursley," Gojo said, very pleasantly. 43 years old. Works in sales at a company called Grunnings. Owns a car that is slightly too large for his needs. Has a son named Dudley who I'm guessing is asleep in the largest bedroom upstairs, surrounded by toys. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't move his eyes at all. "You also have a nephew. Harry Potter. Who is currently asleep in the cupboard beneath your stairs, which I know because I can feel him from out here, which should concern you far more than it probably will." Vernon Dursley had gone the color of old putty. "How do you know about, I'm going to come inside now," Gojo said, and did. He didn't push past Vernon. He simply moved, and Vernon, without quite understanding why, moved with him, stepping back into his own hallway with the expression of a man who had intended to stand his ground and found the ground had relocated without his consent. The hallway was exactly as Gojo had expected. Clean to the point of compulsion. A coat rack with 4 hooks, all used. A small table with a vase of artificial flowers. The door beneath the stairs had a latch on the outside, like a pantry, like a storage room, because that was what the Dursleys had decided a child was, and through it that energy came rolling, slow and warm and enormous and completely unconscious of itself. Gojo looked at the latch for a moment. Then he lifted it, and opened the door. The smell hit him first. Not terrible, not neglect taken to the extreme of genuine squalor, but the specific smell of a space too small for a human body, of air that didn't move enough, of a child who had been given the bare minimum and had quietly accepted it as all there was. There was a cot that was too short. A thin blanket. A shelf with 2 books that were clearly school-related and a toy soldier with 1 arm missing. On the wall beside the shelf, in small careful letters that had been written and rewritten in pencil until the paper had almost worn through, were the words, "My name is Harry." Like a reminder. Like a tether. Gojo stared at those 3 words for longer than he'd stared at anything in a very long time. The child slept through the door opening. He was small, visibly, startlingly small for 5 years old, the kind of small that came from a combination of genetics and insufficient nutrition and the way the body learns to take up less space when taking up space gets punished. Dark hair that went everywhere. A face that even in sleep looked like it was thinking about something. A fading bruise along his left forearm. Glasses, small, round, and broken at the bridge, held together with what appeared to be a strip of electrical tape, sat folded on the shelf beside the 1-armed soldier. Gojo reached out with his senses, not the human ones, the other kind, and felt the shape of the child's power more clearly now that he was close. It was extraordinary. Not just strong, structured. Already, in a 5-year-old body, it had the beginnings of something architectural. Most untrained magical children radiated their power indiscriminately, a chaotic burst that faded and flared with emotion. This was different. This was a power that had been living inside itself for long enough that it had started to organize around its own center of gravity. Given time and the right pressure, this would become something that didn't have a category. Behind him, Vernon Dursley was building toward an eruption. Gojo could hear the particular quality of breathing that preceded the kind of outrage that comes from someone who has spent years constructing a story about themselves as a reasonable person and is now watching that story fall apart. "You can't just, I'll call the police." "You won't," Gojo said, without turning around. "Because then you'd have to explain the cupboard." He reached down and very carefully picked Harry Potter up off the cot, blanket and all. The child stirred, made a small sound, and then subsided, head falling against Gojo's shoulder with the boneless trust that exhausted children give to whatever warmth they can find. "Where are his clothes?" It wasn't a question. There's a bag, in the cupboard, get it." "Now see here," Vernon started, and Gojo turned around. He didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't summon infinity, didn't let his energy unfurl, didn't make any move that could be described as threatening. He just turned around, and the full weight of being Satoru Gojo, the strongest sorcerer alive, the man born once every several centuries, the person who had looked at every powerful thing the Jujutsu world had thrown at him and found it slightly underwhelming, he let some of that weight into his expression. Vernon Dursley, who had no ability to see cursed energy and no framework for understanding what he was looking at, nonetheless sat down very suddenly on the bottom step of the staircase. "The bag," Gojo said. The bag was retrieved. It contained 3 items of clothing, all too large, all hand-me-downs of such extended vintage that the original color was anyone's guess. Gojo looked at them and felt something move in his chest that he filed under not relevant right now and kept moving. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, thin, angular, with a neck slightly too long and eyes slightly too sharp and the look of someone who had made a series of decisions a long time ago that she had never stopped justifying to herself. She looked at Gojo. She looked at the child in his arms. "What are you doing with him?" she said. It was flat. Not frightened. Just flat, like she was asking about a piece of furniture being moved. "Taking him," Gojo said. "You can't just, Petunia." He used her name the way he'd used her husband's, simply, like he'd known her for years, like he was familiar with the whole shape of her life, which after a fashion he was, because the child in his arms had been radiating the record of this house for 5 years and Gojo could read the frequency of it as clearly as a text. "Your sister trusted you with him. I know that's complicated. I know you've never wanted this and I know you're frightened of what he is because you've spent your whole life being frightened of what your sister was." He watched her face. It didn't change, but her hands, gripping the banister, went white at the knuckles. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm just taking him somewhere he can become what he's supposed to be." "He's nothing," she said. "He's just a boy." "Yeah," Gojo said. "That's the part you got right." He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the autumn night. The door closed behind him. Harry stirred again when the cool air hit his face, and this time his eyes opened, unfocused without the glasses, the color of them striking even in the poor light of Privet Drive's cautious street lamps. Green, and not just green but the particular shade of green that looked like it was lit from the inside, like something alive and photosynthetic and entirely its own. The boy looked up at Gojo's face and did not look frightened. That was the thing that hit Gojo second. The first was the power. The second was this child, woken by a stranger at midnight, held in arms that didn't belong to anyone he knew, looked up with an expression of careful, serious evaluation, like a very small scholar examining new data, and said nothing. Just looked. "Hey," Gojo said. "Hello," Harry said. His voice was small and slightly hoarse and completely composed. "I'm Gojo. Are you a doctor?" "No." "Are you from the government?" Gojo blinked. "Why would you ask that?" Uncle Vernon says that if I'm bad the government will come and take me away. A pause. I try not to be bad but sometimes things happen and I don't know why. Gojo looked down at him for a moment. Then he said, with more gentleness than he typically used for anything, I'm not from the government. And nothing that happened to you is because you were bad. Harry thought about this with the same seriousness he'd brought to everything else. Then why are things happening? Because you're, Gojo started, and then stopped, because he was about to say special, and every child who'd ever had a hard life had been told they were special, and he wanted to tell this child something that was actually true. Because the universe is big and weird and doesn't do anything the way you'd expect, and you ended up with a lot of it concentrated in one very small person. Harry looked at this. Is that good? It's complicated. Gojo shifted him to one arm and reached into his coat with the other, pulling out a pair of his spare sunglasses, smaller, white, round, and settled them on Harry's face over the broken regular ones. They were too large and slid immediately to the end of his nose. Harry pushed them up with one finger. Considered. They're very white, he said. They're very me, Gojo said. Come on. He walked to the end of Privet Drive and kept walking, and Harry didn't ask where they were going. He just held on to Gojo's coat lapel with one small fist and looked at the night around them with those too attentive eyes, and Gojo walked them both out of the radius of the most ordinary street in England. They reached a park 3 blocks over, small, municipal, a sad little climbing frame and 2 swings and a bench that had been repainted so many times the wood beneath was invisible. Gojo sat on the bench. Harry sat beside him, wrapped in his thin blanket, legs dangling because they didn't reach the ground. You're Satoru Gojo? Harry said, clearly having been processing the introduction this whole time. Just Gojo usually. Some people say sensei. You can pick. What's a sensei? Teacher. Another consideration. Are you going to teach me things? That's the plan. What kind of things? Gojo looked up at the sky. Surrey at night was suburban bleak but the stars were there if you looked past the light pollution, faint and numerous and entirely indifferent to the domestic dramas of number 4, Privet Drive. Everything I know. Harry followed his gaze upward. He'd been looking at a patch of sky roughly 10 degrees off vertical, the kind of unfocused stare that suggested he hadn't had much practice looking at anything that wasn't a wall or the underside of the stairs, and now he tilted his whole head back and looked at the full breadth of what was there. His breath caught. It was a small sound, barely anything, but it was the most unguarded thing he'd done since he'd woken up, the first moment where the careful composure cracked open and something younger and more astonished fell through. There are a lot of them, he said. There are an unreasonable number of them, Gojo agreed. The universe is showing off. Which one is closest? Proxima Centauri. About 4 light-years away. What's a light-year? How far light travels in a year? Light moves at roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. Harry's mouth moved silently, working through a calculation that a 5-year-old shouldn't have been attempting and doing it with the quiet intensity of someone for whom arithmetic was a private language he'd discovered in the walls of a cupboard. That's very far, he concluded. Very far, Gojo confirmed. But you can see it. You can see it. Harry sat with this for a moment. Then, can you see everything? Gojo tilted his head. The question was more interesting than it should have been coming from a 5-year-old who'd been awake for approximately 10 minutes after being extracted from a cupboard. What do you mean by everything? All the things that are happening. All the, Harry frowned, reaching for a word he didn't have yet. He pressed his small fingers together and then spread them apart, like he was miming an explosion in slow motion. All the stuff. Gojo turned and looked at him fully. Almost, he said, which was the most honest answer he'd given anyone in a long time. Not everything. But close. Harry nodded, apparently satisfied. He huddled into the blanket and looked back at the stars with the focused attention of someone studying a map of somewhere he intended to visit. Gojo sat beside him and did something he almost never did, which was nothing. He sat, and he let the night be quiet, and he let this child who'd been writing his own name on a wall to remember it, "My name is Harry, my name is Harry, my name is Harry," have the stars for as long as he wanted. After a while, Harry said, "Are we going somewhere?" "Yes." "Where?" "Japan." "Eventually. Tonight we're going to a hotel in London where they have room service." Harry absorbed this. "What's room service?" "Food that comes to you in bed." A very long pause. "Food comes to your bed?" "Whatever food you want." Harry pulled the blanket tighter and said, with the gravity of someone making a serious decision, "I've never had whatever food I want." "I know," Gojo said. "Can I have?" He stopped. "Start it again." "Is there a limit?" "No." Harry nodded once, firmly, like a deal had been struck. Then he leaned slightly, just slightly, the barest rebalancing of weight, against Gojo's arm, and looked back up at the stars. Gojo looked at the side of his face. At the two large glasses still perched on his nose, at the broken bridge of his real ones visible underneath, at the dark hair falling into his eyes and the bruise on his forearm fading from purple to green, at the child who'd written his own name on a wall to remember he existed. He thought about the shape of the power he'd felt. He thought about the architectural quality of it, the way it had already begun to crystallize around its own center. He thought about infinity, about the principle that underpinned everything he was and everything he could do, the idea that between any 2 points there was a distance that could be divided infinitely, that the world was full of spaces that only a specific kind of mind could learn to inhabit. He thought about what this child might become if someone gave him the space to become it. Then he stood, picked Harry up again, and began walking toward the nearest road where he could get a cab, because even Gojo didn't feel like carrying a child the full distance to Mayfair. "Gojo?" Harry said, from his shoulder. "Yeah. My name is Harry." "I know, Harry. A pause that was small and slightly uncertain in a way none of the other pauses had been. "I wanted to say it. To a person." Gojo didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Harry Potter." The child went still. "Your full name is Harry James Potter. You're 5 years old. Your parents were James and Lily Potter, and they were extraordinary people." He felt Harry grip his coat a little tighter. "And you're going to be something the world hasn't figured out how to categorize yet. Which, personally, I find very interesting." "What are you?" Harry asked. He said it the way a child asks what is the sky made of, not challenging, just genuinely wanting to know, because he'd decided Gojo was the kind of person who would tell him the actual answer. "The strongest," Gojo said, without inflection, without performance. "Just fact." "The strongest what?" "Everything." Harry considered this with the same methodical patience he'd brought to the star calculation. Then he said, "Okay. Just okay." Like it explained something he'd been wondering about since he woke up. They reached the road. A black cab came. Gojo got in, Harry in his lap now because the child had stopped being very awake and was listing sideways in the way that meant consciousness was becoming a technicality. The driver looked in the mirror, took in the white-haired man and the small child wrapped in a blanket wearing 2 pairs of sunglasses, and decided, with the professionalism of a long-serving London cabbie, that this was not his business. "Mayfair," Gojo said. "Right," said the driver. Harry was asleep before they reached the next junction, deeply and completely, with the specific quality of someone who had just decided, without any discussion, that wherever this was going, he was going to be all right. Gojo looked out the window at London sliding past, the lights, the bridges, the river that was dark and silver and old as anything, and thought about what he'd tell Yaga, and whether the Tokyo Jujutsu organization had any protocols for found this child in England who seems to be doing something I don't have a framework for and I'm keeping him. He was reasonably certain they didn't. He was completely certain it didn't matter. Outside, London rolled on. Inside the cab, one of the strangest partnerships in the history of either the Jujutsu world or the wizarding world began its first night in the simplest way imaginable, a child sleeping soundly because something that felt safe had, for the first time in his memory, come to find him. Gojo looked at the stars through the cab window, the few that survived London's upward light, and felt the shape of the future rearranging itself around this new variable. He smiled. It was the real one. The one that didn't have any performance in it. The one only the stars usually got to see. Interesting, he thought. Very, very interesting. The cab turned onto a brighter road, and the stars were swallowed up by the city's light, and Harry Potter slept through it all without flinching, dreaming, for the first time anyone could remember, of something other than a wall. Chapter 2, 10 Years of the Strongest. The hotel room service arrived at 1:15 in the morning. Harry was awake for it. He'd slept in the cab and slept again in the elevator and woken up the moment Gojo set him down on a bed that was, by Harry's extremely limited frame of reference, approximately the size of the entire cupboard, and lay there with his eyes open and his hands flat against the duvet, feeling the softness of it with the deliberate attention of someone cataloging a new experience. Then Gojo had picked up the phone and said, "Yeah, I'd like to order. Harry, what do you want?" Harry had sat up. He'd thought about it with the gravity of someone making a decision with long-term consequences. Then he said, "Toast. And, is there soup?" "What kind?" "Any kind." A pause. "All of them." So there was toast and 4 kinds of soup, and also Gojo had ordered a club sandwich and chips and a chocolate cake because it was someone's first hotel room service and it needed to be comprehensive, and they sat cross-legged on the enormous bed at 1:15 in the morning with silver-domed plates around them, and Harry worked through a bowl of tomato soup with the focused silence of someone who had never before had an unlimited quantity of any food and was not going to waste a single moment of it on conversation. Gojo watched him and ate his sandwich and didn't say anything. When Harry had finished the tomato soup and was starting on the chicken broth with both hands around the bowl like it might escape, he looked up and said, "Is this what it's always like for you?" "What, room service? Food? Any time. Whatever you want." "Yeah," Gojo said. Harry looked back at his soup. "That's good," he said, simply, and kept eating. They left London the next morning. Paris the day after. By the end of the week they were in Tokyo, staying in a flat in Shinjuku that Gojo technically maintained but had not actually lived in for several months, which became apparent when they opened the refrigerator and found nothing but 2 cans of beer, a bottle of hot sauce, and a piece of fruit at an advanced stage of philosophical contemplation. "We should buy food," Harry said. "Absolutely," Gojo agreed, and took him to a convenience store at 10 p.m. and let him walk every aisle as many times as he wanted. Harry stood in front of the onigiri section for a long time, reading the labels he couldn't read because they were in Japanese, studying the shapes with the glasses Gojo had gotten him, proper ones now, round and slightly too large for his face but better than electrical tape, perched on his nose. "Pick one," Gojo said. "I don't know what they are." "That's the point." Harry picked tuna mayo. He stood on the pavement outside the convenience store eating it at 10:30 p.m. and decided that Japan was the most interesting place he'd ever been, which was a high bar to clear given that he'd also seen Paris, but Japan cleared it easily because Japan had vending machines on every corner that sold hot coffee and cold pocky and sometimes, inexplicably, umbrellas. Gojo watched him eat the onigiri and thought, "All right, then." And that was how it started. The training started the 3rd week. Not because Gojo had planned it, or not only because of that. It started because Harry woke up early one morning, sat in the center of the living room floor with his legs crossed, closed his eyes, and went very still. When Gojo wandered out of his bedroom an hour later, Harry was still there. Still. The energy around him had settled into that particular low-frequency hum, the architectural quality Gojo had first felt on Privet Drive, and the air around him was doing something subtle and slightly wrong in the way that air around genuinely powerful things sometimes did. Gojo sat on the couch, ate a piece of toast, and watched him. After another 20 minutes Harry opened his eyes and said, "I think there's something inside me." "Yeah. It's been there a long time. Since you were born, probably." Harry looked at his hands. "What is it?" Gojo leaned forward, elbows on knees. That's actually a very good question. Because for me it's one thing, and for the world you come from it's another thing, and in you it might be both at once. Harry looked at him with that careful evaluating look. Show me yours first. Gojo laughed, genuinely, not performed. Okay. He held up one hand and let infinity bloom, just slightly, just enough to make the air around his palm go slightly distant, slightly unreachable, like looking at something through the wrong end of a telescope. A pencil from the coffee table lifted and flew at his hand and stopped, mid-air, an inch from his palm, and stayed there. Harry watched it. Then he leaned forward and tried to touch the pencil. His finger met, not resistance exactly, but distance. The pencil was right there and also somehow not reachable, like the last step that kept not arriving. It never actually touches you, Harry said. Nothing does. Unless I let it. Harry sat back. He looked at his own hands. Can I learn that? I don't know, Gojo said, which was the honest answer, because infinity was his by birthright and nature, not learnable by ordinary means. But I think what's in you might do something like it, if we give it room to grow. This was technically true. This was also, Gojo would later understand, a significant understatement of what the universe was in the process of engineering, but at the time it was the best he had. Harry nodded and closed his eyes again, and that was the third week. By the end of the first month, Harry could do the thing with the air, a small version, clumsy and inconsistent, like someone turning a light switch on and off. A thrown ball would slow before it reached him. Books would hover briefly. Small objects would stop in mid-transit as though considering their options. It was nothing like infinity. It was also not nothing. What are you doing when you do it? Gojo asked one afternoon, watching Harry redirect a thrown beanbag without opening his eyes. I'm thinking about the space between, Harry said. Between the thing and me. Like, there's always a gap, yeah. Between where something is and where it's going. I just make the gap bigger. Gojo was quiet for a moment. Who taught you to think about it that way? No one. It just feels like that. Gojo looked at the ceiling. Then he said, you're going to be very annoying, you know that? Harry opened his eyes. Why? Because you're going to figure things out that took me years in about a month and it's going to be very bad for my ego. Harry considered this with absolute seriousness and then said, you could just be proud of me instead. I could, Gojo agreed. I'm working on it. Shoko came to the flat 6 weeks in. She knocked on the door at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, took one look at the small black-haired child sitting at the kitchen table doing arithmetic homework while Gojo stood at the counter eating cold noodles directly from the container, and said, Satoru. Hey, Shoko. There is a child at your kitchen table. There is. Doing homework. 3rd grade maths. He's blowing through it, actually, Satoru. His name is Harry. Harry, this is Shoko. She's a doctor and she makes very good life choices, unlike me. Shoko looked at Harry. Harry looked at Shoko with the round glasses and the evaluating expression. Hello, he said. Hello, Shoko said, still looking at Gojo with an expression that communicated volumes without wasting words, which was one of the things Gojo had always appreciated about her. She came in, sat at the kitchen table across from Harry, and said, Where are you from, Harry? England. Surrey. And Gojo brought you here? Yes. Did he explain why? He said I have a lot of the universe concentrated in a small person. Shoko looked at Gojo. Gojo gestured with his noodle container in a way that meant more or less accurate. Shoko pressed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers and said, I'm going to need a drink. She stayed for 3 hours. By the end of it she had checked Harry over with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had been patching up cursed energy-adjacent humans for years, declared him healthy but undernourished and prescribed a meal plan that Gojo photographed on his phone with good intentions and partially followed, and taught Harry 3 card tricks. Harry mastered all three before she left. He's extraordinary, she told Gojo quietly, at the door, while Harry practiced shuffling the deck at the table with the determined focus he brought to everything. I know. Are you going to teach him properly or are you going to be yourself about it? Those aren't mutually exclusive. Shoko gave him a look. Satoru. I'll teach him properly, he said. Then, because it was Shoko and he didn't bother performing with Shoko, I know what he is. I can feel the shape of it. Whatever's inside him, it's not just one thing. It's going to be the biggest thing I've ever helped build. Shoko studied his face. You're scared. I'm interested. You're scared and calling it interesting. Gojo pointed at the door. She left laughing. Nanami came to the flat 3 months in, uninvited, which was unusual for Nanami, who approached all social interactions as though they were professional appointments. He stood in the living room doorway with his briefcase and his tie and looked at the scene before him, Harry on the floor doing what appeared to be a modified meditation exercise while small objects from around the room orbited him in slow, wobbly ellipses, and Gojo on the couch watching with the intensity he usually reserved for a good fight. Gojo, Nanami said. Nanami. Gojo didn't look away from Harry. Sit down. Watch this. I'm not, Nanami stopped. He looked at the orbiting objects. He looked at the child at the center of them, small, dark-haired, utterly concentrated. He looked at the quality of the energy field, the specific structure of it, the way it organized itself around an internal logic rather than radiating outward the way untrained energy did. He set his briefcase down. He sat. Harry finished the exercise and opened his eyes and the objects dropped, gently, each one settling rather than falling, like someone had placed them down by hand. He saw Nanami, assessed him with 2 seconds of direct attention, and said, "Hello. Are you from the Jujutsu school?" "I work adjacent to it," Nanami said. "Gojo says the school is complicated." "Gojo is not wrong about that." Nanami looked at Gojo. "How long?" 3 months. "And he's doing that." "He's doing that." Nanami was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his briefcase, withdrew a thermos, poured tea, and said to Harry, "Show me again." Harry looked pleased in the quiet way he was pleased about things, not grinning, just a slight increase in aliveness around the eyes, and closed them again, and the objects began their slow orbit once more. Hibara came once, briefly, in the 4th month. He was 21 and deeply earnest and brought Harry a manga that he thought a child might like. Harry read it in one sitting, at 2 in the afternoon, lying on the floor with his feet in the air, and then sat up and said, "In the story, the main character gets stronger by training very hard even when it hurts. Does it have to hurt to work?" Hibara opened his mouth. "Gojo, from the kitchen, it doesn't have to hurt to work. It just has to be hard." "What's the difference?" "Pain is just your body telling you something is new," Gojo said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea, one of which he handed to Hibara and the other to Harry. "The hurt part goes away when the new thing becomes normal. The hard part stays, but the hard part is the good part." Harry looked at his tea. "That makes sense," he said, and it sounded like he meant it. Hibara looked at Gojo with an expression Gojo filed under things I'm not ready to examine right now and said nothing. The years did what years do. Harry grew. Not fast, he'd been too small for too long and the body doesn't rush catching up, but steadily, with the quality of something that was growing in the right direction rather than just growing. His English got mixed up with Japanese in the comfortable way of a child who'd stopped thinking about languages as separate things and started thinking of them as different instruments in the same orchestra. He read everything he could find, which in Gojo's flat meant jujutsu theory texts and whatever novels Shoko left behind and 3 years of weekly Shonen Jump back issues and, crucially, every wizarding book he could get his hands on. The wizarding books were Gojo's doing. He'd found a wizarding supplier in Diagon Alley, via a contact who owed him a favor, and procured a collection of textbooks and histories that he presented to Harry on his 7th birthday in a stack taller than Harry's knee. Harry had looked at them for a long moment, then at Gojo, then back at them. "These are for the other thing," he said. "The thing inside me that's different from yours." "Yours does both," Gojo said. "It's going to be better if you understand both." Harry picked up Hogwarts, a history, and opened it to the first page and began reading standing up, which was how he read everything that interested him enough, and Gojo ate his birthday cake in comfortable silence. By 8, Harry had worked through the standard Hogwarts curriculum up to 4th year. Not because Gojo pushed him. Gojo's teaching style was less push and more remove all the ceiling tiles and see what happens, but because Harry had found the intersection of Jujutsu theory and wizarding theory and it had consumed him utterly. He'd figured out, alone, on a Tuesday, with a piece of chalk in the living room floor, that the wizarding concept of intent and the Jujutsu concept of cursed energy output directionality were describing the same phenomenon from different cultural angles. He'd presented this to Gojo by standing in the kitchen doorway at 11 p.m. and saying, "They're the same thing, you know." Gojo had put down his cup. "Show me." Harry had shown him. Gojo had stared at the chalk diagram on the floor for a long time and then said, "You cannot tell Nanami this. His head will explode." "Can I tell Shoko?" "Tell Shoko everything. She can handle anything." Harry told Shoko. Shoko did not have a head explosion, but she did make Gojo buy dinner for a month, on the grounds that she had been right about Harry being extraordinary and she deserved compensation for the stress of knowing Gojo was primarily responsible for raising that level of extraordinary. The physical training was Gojo's favorite part, which said something about him that he was entirely comfortable with. He started it properly when Harry was 7, basic movement and body awareness first, which Harry hated because it wasn't interesting enough, then the kind of footwork that came before everything else, then gradually more complex exercises in which Harry's developing energy sense played a role. By 9 Harry could dodge things he hadn't seen with a success rate that made Gojo graded as statistically significant. By 10 he could redirect incoming force using the spatial manipulation that was growing into something genuinely novel, not infinity, not standard wizarding magic, but a third thing that combined the principles of both into a working theory that Harry had constructed himself from the floor up. They traveled constantly. Tokyo was home base, but it was rarely where they were. London, Marrakesh, Seoul, Sydney, Rome, New York. Gojo had things to do and Harry came along and learned things that weren't in any book: how to read a situation before it became a problem, how to move in a crowd without being visible, how to be in a foreign country and understand what was happening around you not from language alone but from energy, from the way people held their bodies and the way the air tasted when something was wrong. Harry absorbed it all with the same quiet intensity he'd brought to 4 kinds of soup at 1:15 in the morning. He didn't show off what he knew. He didn't perform it. He just knew it, and used it when it was useful, and filed it when it wasn't. "You're better at this than me," Gojo said once, watching Harry navigate a crowded Shinjuku intersection at rush hour on a Friday evening, sliding through the bodies and the competing energies with the ease of someone to whom crowds had become a kind of music. The reading people part. "You're not trying," Harry said. "I'm not trying. You already know you're the strongest, so you don't need to know where the threats are." Harry looked up at him. "I had to learn where the threats were a long time before I learned I could handle them. It's different." Gojo looked at him. Harry was 9 and his head came to Gojo's shoulder and he was talking about threat mapping in crowded civilian environments as though it was the most natural thing in the world, which for him it probably was. "Yeah," Gojo said. "It is different." They didn't talk about the Dursleys much. They talked about it once, properly, when Harry was 8 and they were on a night train from Kyoto to Tokyo and the compartment was dark and quiet and Harry had been reading for 2 hours and then closed the book and said, with no preamble, "Why did they put me in the cupboard?" Gojo had been expecting the question for 3 years. He'd had an answer prepared. In the end he didn't use it, because Harry was 8 and the prepared answer was too careful, and Harry deserved better than careful. Because they were frightened of what you were, and frightened people do small, mean things to whatever frightens them, he said. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. Harry looked at the dark window, at his own reflection superimposed on the lights of passing towns. "I know," he said. "You've always known." "I wrote my name on the wall," Harry said. "My name is Harry. I used to say it to myself at night. Not because I'd forgotten it. I just wanted to hear a person say it." "Harry James Potter," Gojo said. Harry looked at him. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Yeah," he said. "Like that." The magic developed in leaps rather than gradual increments, which Gojo noted and found consistent with the architectural quality he'd observed from the beginning. For months nothing would change, and then Harry would sit down one morning and do something he hadn't been able to do the day before, having apparently processed and solved the problem entirely in his sleep. Wandless magic was natural to him, which wasn't supposed to be possible at his level of training, but Harry's magic had never particularly cared what was supposed to be possible. He didn't need to speak incantations for anything below a certain complexity threshold. Above that threshold he used Latin initially, then stopped using it because he'd worked out the underlying logical structure of the spell forms and could generate the outputs directly. "This is cheating," Gojo said, watching Harry light every candle in the flat simultaneously without a wand, a word, or visible effort. "You said you teach me everything you know." "I said that, yeah." "You walk through everything," Harry said. "Nothing touches you. So I thought, the magic should be the same. If I understand what I want it to do well enough, it should just do it. Like intention is the wand. For most wizards, the wand channels and focuses, for most wizards," Harry said. Gojo looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "You know, it is actually very bad for my ego." "I know," Harry said, not unkindly. "You should just be proud of me." "I'm working on it," Gojo said, for the second time, which was not true because he'd finished working on it approximately 6 months ago, but he didn't say so. The cursed energy training was where Harry surprised him most. Not in power, the power had been obvious from the first night, but in methodology. Most sorcerers, even naturally gifted ones, had to be walked through the conceptual framework before they could manipulate their energy deliberately. Harry had the framework already, built from scratch out of the overlap between Jujutsu theory and wizarding theory, and when Gojo introduced him to formal cursed energy manipulation at 9, Harry spent 4 days being technically behind the curve and then on the 5th day asked if he could try something. He sat down and turned his energy inward, which was backwards from standard methodology, and did something that Gojo couldn't quite see from the outside but could feel, a compression, a refolding, a taking of the vast diffuse field around him and pulling it into a structure that was denser and more organized and more pointed than anything a 9-year-old should have been doing. When he opened his eyes, the air around him was doing the thing it had done since the beginning, the slightly wrong quality, but now it was consistent. Stable. Not clumsy. The beanbag Gojo threw at him stopped 3 inches from his face without Harry blinking. "Don't name it yet," Harry said, anticipating the question. "Why not?" "Because I'm still building it." He caught the beanbag, which dropped from its suspended position into his palm. "It'll have a name when it's finished." Gojo sat down across from him. He felt the structure of what Harry had built and thought about the word infinity and the way his own technique had crystallized around the mathematical principle of limitlessness, around the concept that the universe was made of distances that could always be halved, and he thought about what Harry's version was organized around. Space. The space between. The idea that between any 2 points, between a threat and a target, between a question and an answer, between what was and what could be, there was a gap that could be made to mean something. "You understand what you're doing," Gojo said. "I understand the shape of it." Most people don't understand the shape of their own techniques for years. Harry shrugged. "I've had a lot of time to think." The cupboard was boring. Gojo said nothing. Harry seemed to realize how that had landed and added, quickly, I don't mean it like, I know," Gojo said. Silence. "Gojo." "Yeah. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I used to have nothing to do but think, and now I have everything to do and I still think, so the thinking part just got bigger." He looked at his hands. It's useful. It is useful, Gojo agreed. Harry. Yeah. I know you're not saying it to make me feel bad. Harry nodded, satisfied, and picked up the beanbag again and began testing the edges of his new construction with the systematic patience that was probably his most dangerous quality, and Gojo watched him and felt the weight of a large, complicated emotion that he'd been carrying for 4 years and would probably carry for the rest of his life, whatever that looked like. The summer before Hogwarts, Harry turned 11. Gojo got him a cake from the bakery 3 blocks over, the specific bakery that did the matcha cream-layered kind that Harry had declared the best food in Tokyo during an early visit and had never revised the ranking on despite extensive international competition. He put 11 candles on it. He put it on the kitchen table and called Harry from the living room, and Harry came in barefoot and read and saw the candles and went very still for a moment. "Happy birthday," Gojo said. Harry looked at the candles. All 11 of them, which meant someone had counted. Someone had kept track. He was 11, which meant he'd been here 6 years, which meant he'd been here longer than he'd been anywhere else, which meant this was home, and he'd known that for a long time, but the 11 candles made it very specific in a way that landed somewhere in his chest and sat there warm. "Blow them out," Gojo said. Harry blew them out. He got all 11 in one breath. They ate cake for breakfast. Harry cut 2 pieces and ate his methodically, and Gojo ate his in 3 bites, and Harry said, "That's not how cake is supposed to be eaten," and Gojo said, "I don't follow rules that I personally haven't approved," and Harry said, "You'd say that about everything," and Gojo said, "Yes, and then the window opened." Neither of them opened the window. It opened on its own, the latch lifting, the frame swinging inward, and something flew through it. Something that, in the August morning light of Shinjuku, was unmistakably a wand. White as bone, carved from elder wood, trailing what might have been a thread of something that was both light and not light, both visible and only visible from the corner of the eye. It flew across the kitchen and stopped in front of Harry. Hovering. Harry set down his fork. He looked at the wand. He reached out his right hand and the wand settled into his palm with the specific quality of an object that had been traveling toward a destination for a very long time and had arrived. The energy in the room went strange. Not dangerous. Strange, the way the horizon goes strange before a storm when the pressure drops. The wand's resonance and Harry's power interfaced and then did something that Gojo had never seen before and had no category for, which didn't happen to Gojo. The architecture inside Harry, the structure he'd been building for 2 years, the organized field of spatial manipulation that he'd refused to name because it wasn't finished, shifted. Absorbed something from the wand. Or the wand absorbed something from it. Either way, when the moment passed, both the boy and the wand were different in a way that was legible only to someone who could feel the shape of things. Harry looked at the wand. He turned it over in his hand. He ran his thumb along the length of it once, slowly, the way you'd run your thumb along a blade you were checking for balance. "What is it?" he said. "The Elder Wand," Gojo said. "Dumbledore has the Elder Wand." Dumbledore had the Elder Wand. Until approximately 30 seconds ago, apparently. Gojo was looking at the wand with the expression he'd had in Harry's early morning sessions, the one that was mostly composed but had something much larger moving behind it. "It's one of the Deathly Hallows. Unbeatable wand. Goes to the most powerful wizard who," he stopped. "Who defeats the previous owner," Harry said. "Or who the wand decides it wants," Gojo said. "I think that might be what just happened." Harry closed his hand around the wand. He felt the resonance of it, the deep, old, layered resonance of something that had passed through hundreds of hands over centuries and had learned to know the difference between someone who would use it and someone who would be used by it. It knew the difference. It had chosen accordingly. "It's not finished yet," Harry said, almost to himself. "The building. The technique." He opened his hand and looked at the wand. But this, it filled in something. Something that was missing. "Show me," Gojo said. Harry stood up from the table. He walked into the living room. He stood in the center of it. He held the Elder Wand at his side, loosely, like someone who didn't need to aim. He closed his eyes. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no explosion, no flash of light, no cinematic display of overwhelming force. The air in the room simply became full of space, full of distance, full of the particular quality of a construct that had found its final form. Like a piece of music resolving its last chord. Like a lock finding its key. Harry opened his eyes. Infinite void, he said, quietly, like something long considered. The name landed in the room and sat there with the weight of something that had always been going to be said. Gojo was quiet for a long moment. Because infinite void, that was his. That was his domain, his most powerful construction, the technique that had taken him to the absolute edge of what a human body and a sorcerer's mind could generate. Not the same, clearly not the same, but built from the same source architecture, the same foundational understanding of space as the primary medium of reality. He felt something he was going to need a few hours to correctly identify. Gojo, Harry said. Yeah. Are you proud of me? Gojo looked at him. 11 years old. Round glasses. Bare feet. The Elder Wand in his right hand like it had always been there. The technique that had just named itself filling the air around him like the silence after something vast has spoken. Yeah, Gojo said. I am. Harry smiled. It was the full one, the one that was relatively rare and came from somewhere genuine, and it was, Gojo thought, the best birthday present either of them was going to get that year. The Hogwarts letter arrived 4 days later. Harry was in the living room reading when the owl came, a large, tawny thing that landed on the windowsill and regarded him with the dignity of something on official business. Harry took the letter, fed the owl half a biscuit from his plate because it had clearly traveled far, and opened the letter and read it. He put it on the table. He went back to his book. Gojo, who had watched all of this from the couch, said, well. I've been admitted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. They want me there in September. Harry turned a page. They don't know I've already done 4 years of their curriculum. You going to tell them? I'm going to walk in and see what happens. Gojo put his feet up on the coffee table. That's the best plan you've ever had. I thought you'd like it. Harry glanced up. Are you going to be all right? While I'm there? I'll be fine. You won't eat properly. I'll eat properly. Harry gave him a look that, at 11 years old, communicated the specific skepticism of someone who had been watching another person eat cold noodles over a sink for 6 years. Shoko's number is in the phone. I have Shoko's number. I know. I'm saying use it. He looked back at his book. And don't let Nanami eat alone. He always looks sad when he eats alone. Gojo looked at the ceiling. At the specific point of the ceiling where the weight of the thing he'd been carrying for 4 years and failing to correctly name had gathered and settled into something he could finally, from this angle, read. Pride was part of it. Terror was part of it. Something that looked very much like love was, apparently, most of it. He said nothing. Harry turned another page. Gojo, Harry said, without looking up. Yeah. Thank you. For the stars. The night in the park. The first night. The stars through London's light pollution and the 2 large white sunglasses on a 5-year-old nose. Anytime, Gojo said. And meant it absolutely. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Walked in the Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:40, which gave him 20 minutes to locate the train, identify the least crowded carriage, and watch the chaos of platform 9 3/4 from a comfortable distance before it became his problem. He had one trunk, moderately sized, packed with military efficiency. He had his wand in his right jacket pocket, not the Elder Wand, which he kept in an interior pocket against his chest, but a secondary wand of holly and phoenix feather that Ollivander had pressed into his hands 3 weeks ago while trembling slightly and saying curious, very curious in the way people said things when they understood them less than they pretended. He had his glasses, round and wire-framed and fitting properly now. He had a book in his left hand that he was still reading. He did not have Gojo, who had dropped him at the barrier to King's Cross with a finger gun, the words "try not to break first year," and absolutely no other guidance. Harry had said, "That's it." Gojo had said, "You've had 6 years of guidance. Go see what it's for." Harry had looked at him for a moment. Then he'd nodded and walked through the barrier, and that had been that. The simplicity of it felt right. Gojo had never been the type to stand on train platforms crying, and Harry had never been the type to need him to. He found a carriage near the middle of the train and settled by the window with his book and his trunk stowed above, and watched the platform through the glass with the easy, untroubled attention of someone who was curious about what would happen next rather than frightened of it. The platform was extraordinary if you looked at it the right way. Hundreds of people streaming in all directions, the air thick with competing magical signatures, nervous excitement from the first years, bored familiarity from the older students, the deep ambient hum of the train itself, which was old and soaked through with decades of accumulated magic the way a good kitchen is soaked through with decades of accumulated cooking. Harry tracked the energy flows out of habit, the way you track traffic patterns in a busy intersection. Most of it was chaotic. Untrained. The magical equivalent of everyone shouting at once in different languages. But there were 3 or 4 signatures that were structurally interesting. One large, steady, red-haired family near the barrier, a cluster of magical presences that felt related, built from similar material, the older ones more controlled, the youngest 2 still raw. One girl, bushy-haired, moving very purposefully through the crowd with a cat carrier and 3 books under her arm and a magical signature that was precise and compact and deeply organized, like Nanami's but without the resigned quality. And one boy, moving alone, with a magical signature that was, Harry tilted his head slightly, layered. A strong base, well-built, then something added, something sitting on top of it that didn't quite belong, something coiled and watchful and considerably more complex than anything a first-year professor should have. Harry watched this last one with particular attention. The boy was thin, with a turban, moving through the platform with a smile that was doing a great deal of work but wasn't quite covering the quality beneath it. He filed it away. The train moved at 11 exactly. Harry watched London give way to suburbs give way to open country and read his book, and the door to his compartment slid open around 20 minutes in and the red-haired boy from the platform looked in and said, "Sorry, everywhere else is full, can I sit?" "Yes," Harry said, and moved nothing, because there was already room. The boy came in, dropped into the seat across from him, and exhaled. He had a round, good-natured face with a smear of something that might have been egg on his left cheek and the energy of someone who had been running slightly late and had been pretending he hadn't. He looked at Harry with the frank curiosity of someone for whom social caution was a foreign concept. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry Potter." Ron stared at him for half a second with the specific quality of someone doing rapid recalculation. Harry had seen this look before. He'd been seeing it since Ollivanders. He waited through it with patience. "The Harry Potter?" Ron said. "There's only one, I think." "Right." Ron blinked. Then, with admirable speed, he reassembled himself into someone who was going to treat this as normal information. "Are you actually? I mean, you've got the scar and everything, but loads of people said you'd look, I don't know, different. More impressive?" Harry offered. "I was going to say glowy. My brothers said you'd probably be glowy." Harry looked at him. "How many brothers?" "5. Ron said it with the tone of someone who had used this number as an explanation for many things in their life. 5 brothers. I'm the youngest boy. Then there's Ginny, she's my sister, she's a year behind. And, yeah. 5 brothers. He seemed to feel this covered the relevant context. "Ron Weasley," Harry said. "Yeah. Are you related to the Weasleys who wrote the standard text on advanced transfiguration boundary theory?" Ron looked at him with the expression of someone who had expected many conversational directions and not this one. "That'd be my great-great-aunt, maybe? Something like that. Why? Her section on the limitations of form-based spellwork is wrong, Harry said, returning to his book. In an interesting way. She was close to something but stopped before she got there. Ron stared at him. Then he said, slowly, right. Okay. Are you going to be like this at Hogwarts? Like what? Just that. Ron gestured vaguely at Harry's existence. Saying things like that about books. In that way. Probably, Harry said. Are you going to be annoying about it? Harry looked up. No. Ron appeared to assess this and find it credible. Okay, he said. Do you want a pasty? My mum packed about 47. Yes, Harry said, and closed his book. The pasties were excellent. Ron had 4 and Harry had 2, and they talked about Quidditch for 20 minutes, which Harry had strong opinions on from a theoretical standpoint, and about the wizarding world generally, and Ron talked about growing up with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had never known anything else and had always found it perfectly reasonable, which Harry found refreshing. Most people who found out who Harry was either became very formal or very eager in ways that had nothing to do with him specifically and everything to do with the idea of him. Ron seemed genuinely interested in Harry the actual person, which started the moment Harry expressed the view that the Chudley cannons were operating with fundamentally flawed defensive strategy. That's not, Ron started, then stopped, then said, actually, explain that. So Harry explained it, and Ron argued back with the heat of someone personally invested, and neither of them was right about everything, which made it a good argument. The door slid open again around noon and the girl with the bushy hair leaned in. Up close her magical signature was even more interesting, very precise, very directed, with the quality of someone who had spent considerable time organizing her power around intellectual frameworks. She was carrying the cat carrier and still had 2 books under her arm. Have either of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost one. No, Ron said. Harry said, check near the luggage compartment at the front of the train. Something small and anxious moved up that way about an hour ago. The girl stared at him. How do you know that? I felt it. You felt a toad. I felt the movement of something small and panicked near a warm storage area. It's probably a toad. He paused. Could be a very upset mouse. She looked at him with the focused attention of someone encountering a new category of information. Harry returned the look with the same quality. It lasted about 2 seconds and had the density of a much longer conversation. Hermione Granger, she said. Harry Potter. The expression that moved across her face was different from Ron's. Not recalculation, analysis. She filed it, moved on. You felt the toad's movement. How? Energy sensitivity. He watched her eyes move. I can explain the theory if you want. Later, she said, which meant yes, absolutely, but not in a train corridor. She looked at Ron. Who are you? Ron Weasley. Weasley. Your family's magical lineage is quite impressive. 6 children is unusual for a. She stopped herself, apparently recalibrating for social context. Right, sorry. Hermione Granger. I'm going to go find Neville's toad. She left. Ron watched the space she'd vacated with the expression of someone who'd been slightly winded by a conversation. She's like you, he said. Not quite, Harry said. She's organized her knowledge differently. More externally. Mine is more structural. Right, Ron said. I meant she's also going to be a lot. Harry thought about this. I think she might be my favorite person I've met today. What about me? You're separate. You're the person I'm going to want around when everything else is being very intense. Ron absorbed this. Is that a compliment? It's a description. It's a compliment. Ron seemed to decide it was fine. Want another pasty? They arrived at Hogsmeade as the sky went dark, which was either a coincidence or the castle's idea of a good first impression. Harry stepped off the train and felt Hogwarts before he saw it, a massive, layered, ancient magical presence, accumulated over centuries, the kind of power that wasn't any one person's but had soaked into the stones like everything soaked into stones given enough time. It pressed against his energy sense like a hand pressed flat against glass. Large. Patient. Old. He looked up at the castle across the lake as the boats moved across it, and felt something that he didn't have a name for, but that was neither fear nor awe exactly, more like recognition. Like meeting something that had heard of you and wanted to see for itself. Beside him Ron said, "First time, in the way of someone who'd been here before for older siblings' deliveries." "First time," Harry said. "It gets less big," Ron said, confidently. "Eventually." Harry looked at the castle. He didn't think it would get less big. He didn't want it to. The great hall was loud and bright and high-ceilinged beyond reason, the enchanted sky above doing something with autumn stars and scattered cloud that Harry found more technically impressive than visually. Whoever had built the charm was working with layered spatial duplication of real-world sky conditions, which was not simple magic and had been done once, very well, a very long time ago. He sat with the other first years and watched Dumbledore at the head table. He'd been waiting to see Dumbledore. The old wizard was, more than Harry had expected, even from the portraits in wizarding books, even from Gojo's brief, characteristically non-detailed description, tall, beard, smart, dangerous, wants things he'll never just ask for directly. The magical signature was vast and genuinely old, accumulated over decades, and Harry tracked the shape of it the way you trace the architecture of a building, noting the load-bearing points, noting where the structural choices had been made and why. It was the magic of someone who had spent a long time being the most powerful wizard in the room and had adjusted their whole frame around that assumption. Dumbledore was looking at him. Not obviously. Not rudely. But with the steady, considering attention of someone who had been told something and was now verifying it in person. Harry met his eyes, looked away, looked back at the sorting hat, and kept his expression pleasant and neutral. The hat was placed on a stool. It opened its brim and spoke. Harry listened to the sorting criteria with interest, the 4 houses, their attendant virtues, the hat's apparent ability to read minds, and watched each first year go up with the analytical attention he brought to anything that was going to be relevant to him. Then his name. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the normal between sortings quiet. A different quiet, with edges, the kind that came from 200 people simultaneously deciding to pay close attention to the same thing. Harry stood up from the bench, walked to the stool, sat down, and settled the hat on his head. He expected it to speak. It didn't immediately. There was, instead, a long, dense silence that had the quality of an extremely old and intelligent thing encountering something it hadn't prepared for and taking a moment. "Well," said the hat, in a voice that wasn't a voice, specifically inside his skull. "This is new." "Hello," Harry said back, since there didn't seem to be a reason not to. "I've sorted 11,000 students in 1,000 years, the hat said, and there was something in it that was neither pride nor complaint, just fact. I've seen talent, I've seen ambition, I've seen courage worn like armor and wisdom worn like a mask. I've even seen a few I genuinely couldn't place." A pause, the sensation of something enormous and perceptive turning its attention fully in one direction. "You're different from that." "Different how?" "In all my years I've seen potential and I've seen actualization and occasionally I've seen the gap between them." "You don't have a gap." The hat seemed almost perplexed by this. "You already know what you are. Most children don't know what they are at 11. You do. Which makes sorting you rather academic." "Put me somewhere useful," Harry said. "They're all useful." "Put me somewhere I'll be challenged." "That's rather harder." A sensation like a dry smile. "You have courage sufficient for Gryffindor. Ambition sufficient for Slytherin. Intellect sufficient for Ravenclaw. Loyalty, real loyalty, not performed loyalty, sufficient for Hufflepuff." Another pause. But what you actually are is something the four houses divided between them, and you seem to have retrieved the whole. Then pick the one where I'll do the most good. The hat was quiet for a moment. Then it said, and there was something that might have been amusement in it, I haven't been told what to do in quite some time. I didn't mean it as an order. No. You didn't. A final, settled consideration. Gryffindor. Not because you need the courage, you have that in abundance, but because the company will be good for you. And because that house needs someone who isn't afraid of it. Gryffindor. The hat was removed. The Gryffindor table roared in the specific way of a house that had just been given its season's most prestigious acquisition, which Harry found flattering in a general way and proceeded to discard as he walked to the table and found a seat. Ron, who had been sorted Gryffindor 6 names earlier with the immediate certainty of something inevitable, made room and said, I knew it. Did you? Well, hoped. Same thing. He leaned in. The hat took ages with you. What did it say? That it hadn't been told what to do in a while. Ron stared at him. You told the hat what to do. I gave it a recommendation. Hermione, who had been sorted Gryffindor immediately before Harry and was on his other side, said quietly, What did you recommend? Wherever I'd do the most good. She considered this. Then, that's actually quite strategically sound. I thought so. Across the hall, at the head table, Quirrell was looking at him. Not with the interest of someone meeting a famous student. With the controlled, careful attention of something that had assessed a threat and was deciding what to do about it. Harry noticed. He didn't look back. He picked up his fork as the feast appeared, and said to Ron, Tell me about the teachers. Which ones are worth listening to? Ron, who had 6 years of older sibling intelligence to draw on, launched into a comprehensive review with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting to be asked expert questions. Harry listened, ate, and maintained in his peripheral awareness the cold, watchful energy from the front of the hall without making it obvious that he was doing so. Hermione, following his gaze briefly to Quirrell, said, in a low voice that didn't carry, You felt it too. Harry glanced at her. The irregularity. The wrongness, she said, more precisely. The defense teacher's signature has a fault line. Like something else is using the same space. Harry ate a piece of chicken. Yes. That concerns me. It should. What are you going to do about it? Watch, Harry said. For now. She seemed to consider whether this was an acceptable plan and arrived at a provisional yes. Tell me if you need a research angle. I will. Ron, who had been talking about Professor Flitwick and had paused when he noticed the other two having a side conversation, said, What are you two talking about? Quirrell, Harry said. Ron looked down the hall. What about him? Something's wrong with him, Hermione said. Ron looked at Quirrell's turban. Then back at them. Like, wrong how? Wrong enough that I'm paying attention, Harry said. Which you should take as a data point. Ron absorbed this. Harry had noticed, the useful trait of knowing when to take a person at their word and when to push, and he applied it without apparent calculation, just instinct. He looked at Quirrell again. Then he picked up his fork and said, Right. Is the food good? I feel like the food is good. The food was good. Harry ate and talked and let the feast proceed around him, and 3 seats to Ron's other side a boy named Neville Longbottom was reintroduced to his toad by Hermione's later efforts and was so grateful he smiled at everyone in range. 2 seats down from that, a girl named Lavender Brown was talking about divination. At the Slytherin table, a blonde boy named Malfoy was looking at Harry with an expression Harry recognized as the recalibrating one, the one people wore when they'd expected one thing and encountered another. Harry didn't look at Malfoy. He'd deal with Malfoy when Malfoy required dealing with, which was probably soon, based on the energy. At the head table, Dumbledore was still watching. Not constantly, he was talking to the cat-faced woman on his left, who Harry had identified from portraits as McGonagall, but with the regular returning attention of someone working through a problem in the background of another task. Harry wondered what Dumbledore had been told about him. He wondered what Dumbledore had expected and how far from that expectation the evening had landed. He wondered whether Dumbledore was the kind of person who revised his plans in real time or the kind who kept the plan and adjusted the data. He suspected the latter, which was the more dangerous kind. The feast ended. McGonagall led the Gryffindors to the tower with the upright efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times and had not yet found it routine in a way that would reduce her standards. Harry walked at the middle of the group and looked at the castle around him, not the decorative surfaces of it, the portraits and the moving staircases and the flickering torchlight, but the structural magic of it, the deep-running infrastructure of a building that had been maintained and modified and added to across a millennium and still held together, which was genuinely impressive engineering. The common room was red and gold and warmer than the corridors, with armchairs arranged around a fireplace that had been going long enough that the stones around it were soaked through with warmth. Harry looked at it and thought, with the particular clarity of someone who had had a specific reference point for comparison since age 5, that it was nothing like a cupboard. Ron flopped into an armchair with the ease of someone who had always known he'd end up here. Hermione sat on the edge of a different one and opened a book. Harry stood by the window and looked out at the grounds, dark now, the forest a black edge against slightly less black sky, the lake reflecting nothing, and felt the castle settle around him, enormous and patient, testing the new weight of his presence the way an old building tests new foundations. From the dormitory doorway, a prefect was directing first years to their rooms. Harry turned from the window. Potter. He turned. The prefect, Percy Weasley, who Harry had identified as Ron's insufferably pompous older brother from description alone, was looking at him with the slightly elevated attention everyone had been giving him all evening. Quite the sorting. Was it? Harry said pleasantly. The hat took nearly 4 minutes. Longest since, well. Since a few notable exceptions. I asked it a question. It took a while to answer. Percy seemed to feel this was both highly irregular and entirely consistent with what he'd expect from Harry Potter and didn't know which reaction to prioritize. He settled on professional briskness. Right. Dormitories up the left stairs, third door. Harry went up. Ron was already there. The dormitory had 5 four-poster beds and smelled of the specific combination of old stone and newer fabric that Harry associated with very old buildings that had been recently cleaned. He sat on the edge of his bed and felt the day settling, the train, the sorting, Quirrell's wrong energy, Dumbledore's careful watching, the castle's ancient weight. Hey, Ron said, from the next bed. Yeah. First day of Hogwarts. First day of Hogwarts. A pause. Is it what you expected? Ron asked. Harry thought about this. About what he'd expected and what had actually happened, and whether the distance between them was large or small. The castle was bigger than he'd thought. Hermione was sharper than he'd thought. Ron was better company than he'd hoped. Quirrell was more dangerous than he'd expected a school teacher to be. And Dumbledore was watching him with the eyes of a man who had a plan. Mostly, Harry said. Ron seemed to find this satisfying. He rolled over, pulling his curtain. Night, Harry. Night. Darkness. The fire from the common room below sent orange suggestions of light up through the floorboards. Harry lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and put one hand on the Elder Wand through his jacket, feeling its steady presence, its old certainty, the deep particular resonance of it merged with his infinite void technique in a way that had been settling into its final shape all summer. He thought about Quirrell. The split energy. The thing occupying the same space as a human being, using the space, moving inside it like something wearing a house. He'd felt cursed spirits before. He'd felt powerful ones. This was different, more directed, more intelligent, more specifically oriented toward him in a way that had nothing casual about it. Whatever was inside Quirrell knew exactly who Harry was. Harry closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was, instead, in the way Gojo had taught him to be by example rather than instruction, interested. There was a problem here, and it was a problem he could solve, and the space between where he was and where the solution waited was not a gap but a path. He pressed his thumb along the elder wand once, slowly, checking its balance. Then he slept. The first week of classes was, intellectually speaking, broadly disappointing. Not because the subject matter was without merit, Transfiguration had genuine depth and McGonagall's teaching was the most structurally sound of any class Harry attended, and Charms under Flitwick was methodologically interesting. But the pace was calibrated for students encountering magic formally for the first time, and Harry had 4 years of self-directed study behind him, which meant most introductory sessions were primarily exercises in patience. He was patient about it. He was not visibly bored, because Gojo had once told him that looking bored was a form of rudeness that telegraphed the wrong things to the wrong people, and Harry agreed on principle. But he moved through most of the first week's material at a fraction of his actual pace, answering questions when called on with the correct minimum answer and not more, doing the exercises cleanly and completely and then sitting with his hands still. Hermione noticed this approximately halfway through the first Transfiguration lesson and afterward said, in the corridor, "You're restraining yourself." "I'm working within the frame of the class," Harry said. "You transfigured the match into a needle in 30 seconds. McGonagall said it as a week-long exercise." "I know. You then spent the remaining 25 minutes of the exercise doing something else with it." "I was testing boundary conditions on material transfiguration. Whether the form holds under applied energy pressure, and at what threshold it reverts." Hermione stared at him. "That's third-year material." "Fourth year, actually." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, show me." He showed her, after dinner in an empty classroom, the exercise he'd been running and the results. She followed it with the clean, undisguised speed of someone whose brain processed at a rate that had always outpaced her social comfort with revealing that fact, and she asked the right questions and Harry answered them directly and they spent an hour on material that most people would have described as above their grade level, which was the most interesting hour Harry had spent since arriving. "You've been studying for years," she said, eventually, not accusingly. "Since I was 7, roughly." "Where?" "A wizarding school." "No. Self-directed, mostly." "And Gojo?" "Who's Gojo?" "My guardian. He's, not from the wizarding world exactly. But he knows it." Hermione organized this information in the specific way she organized everything, slotting it into a structure, cross-referencing. "The energy techniques you do. The spatial manipulation thing. That's from him. From him and from me. From you developing his method. From me developing a different version that uses some of the same foundations." He paused. "It's hard to explain as a category." "Try," she said. So Harry tried, and she listened without interrupting, and when he was done she said, "So it's not strictly wizarding magic and it's not strictly what Gojo does and it's both in a way that's qualitatively new." "Yes. And the wand you keep in your jacket. That's not your primary wand." Harry looked at her. She was the first person who'd noticed the second wand, which meant she'd been paying closer attention than he'd realized, which went upward in his estimation of her. "No," he said. She waited. He considered. Then he reached into his jacket and held it out, not giving it to her, just showing it, the way you'd show someone something that mattered. She looked at it without touching it. "Elder Wand," she said, almost immediately. "Yes. Hermione." He looked at her. "The Elder Wand chose Dumbledore." "It chose me," Harry said, simply. She looked at his face. He looked back at her with the steady, untroubled expression he wore for things that were true and didn't require defending. "All right," she said. "All right." She looked back at the table, at the notes she'd been making. "This changes several things I was thinking about regarding the third-floor corridor." "What were you thinking about the third-floor corridor?" "That the three-headed dog guarding it is not a standard security measure for a school, which means whatever is under it is not a standard item, which means we should find out what it is. She met his eyes. You already know. I have a guess. Tell me. The Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Flamel's Stone. Moved from Gringotts, I think. There was an attempted break-in in July, it was in the Prophet. Hermione's eyes went slightly wider. Then narrowed. That break-in was the same day Hagrid collected something from Gringotts Vault 713. I know. Which means someone tried to take it and failed, and now it's here. Yes. And the energy you felt on Quirrell, is the thing that tried to take it, Harry said. And failed. And is now inside the teacher who guards the subject most adjacent to the stone's defense level. Hermione put her pen down with a careful precision that indicated she was doing it deliberately to avoid doing something less composed. That is, a significant security failure on Dumbledore's part. Or, Harry said, it's not a failure. She looked at him. He's smart, Harry said. The corridor, the stone, the trap, Dumbledore puts it here because it's the one place where, if someone comes for it, he controls the environment. He folded his hands. The question is what he expects to use as the final defense. The room was very quiet. He expects to use you, Hermione said. Probably. Because of the prophecy. Harry looked at her sharply. She said, I've read everything. Extensively. I know about the prophecy. A pause. Everyone in the wizarding world knows there's a prophecy. They just don't know what it says. Neither do I, technically, Harry said. Not exactly. But you know the shape of it. The shape of it is, someone has to end what Voldemort started. He said the name without flinching. Hermione did flinch, slightly, then straightened up. Dumbledore has been planning around that for 10 years. He expected me to come in as a piece of that plan. And instead you came in as, you. Yes. Hermione looked at him. In the low light of the empty classroom, with her notes around her and her hair doing something complicated with the air, she looked less like someone who needed things explained and more like someone who was rapidly deciding how far she was willing to go. I want to be involved, she said. In whatever you're doing. Whatever you figure out about Quirrell and the stone and all of it. It might not be safe, Harry said. I know. It might involve breaking several school rules. I know. I probably won't tell Dumbledore what I'm doing. I know, she said, for the third time, and there was something in it that wasn't agreement so much as arrival, the sound of someone reaching a conclusion they'd been working toward since they stepped on the train. Tell me what you need from me. Harry looked at her for a moment. At the precise, intense, entirely fearless quality of her. At the mind behind the eyes that was already 3 steps ahead of most people in any room and knew it and had learned not to show it and was, right now, choosing not to hide it. Research, he said. You're better at the formal library side than me. I work more by feel. Feel and formal together is better than either alone. Yes, Harry said. She gathered her notes. She stood. She said, at the door, one condition. What? You teach me the spatial manipulation technique. Harry looked at her. Then, for the first time since he'd sat on the Hogwarts Express and opened his book, he smiled the full smile. The real one. Deal, he said. Outside, Hogwarts creaked and settled as old buildings do in the night, its stones carrying the weight of centuries without complaint, its enchanted sky cycling through autumn stars that Harry could see through the classroom's high window, fewer than the ones he'd watched from Surrey on the first night, filtered through the castle's stone and magic, but present. He looked at them for a moment before following Hermione out. The stars were the same ones. They didn't care where you were or how much had changed. They just stayed there, enormous and patient, waiting for you to look up. Harry looked up. Then he walked out into the corridor and toward whatever was going to happen next, with exactly the same energy he brought to everything, interested, unafraid, and entirely ready. Chapter 4, Mirrors and Void. The third floor corridor breathed. Not literally. Harry was fairly certain the castle wasn't alive in the way a person was alive, though after 3 months inside it he'd revised that certainty downward a few notches. But the third floor had a specific quality of attention that the rest of Hogwarts didn't, a subtle pressure in the air that started about 15 feet before the locked door and built steadily until you were standing in front of it, and then settled around you like something deciding what to make of you. Harry had been walking past it twice a week since October. Not going in. Just walking past. Getting familiar with the shape of what was behind it, the three-headed dog, which was a genuinely impressive animal, and Harry had no interest in distressing it unnecessarily, and beneath the dog the layered magical security that Dumbledore and various staff members had constructed over the summer. Each layer had a signature. Harry had mapped all of them. He knew the chess pieces were McGonagall's. The logic puzzle was Snape's, which surprised him, because he'd expected Snape's contribution to be something more instinctual and violent, but Snape was apparently a more lateral thinker than his classroom manner suggested. Sprout's contribution was botanical, which made structural sense. Flitwick's was a charm of notable delicacy. The deepest layer, the one that sat directly over the stone like a hand cupped around a flame, was Dumbledore's. Harry had touched its edge twice, and both times it had done something he didn't fully understand, not resisted, exactly, but recognized. Like a lock that knew your hand wasn't the right hand but was looking at you thoughtfully before deciding to say so. It was the mirror of Eriste. He'd worked that out from cross-referencing Hermione's research with the magical signature of the deepest layer, which had the quality of something reflective in a metaphysical sense, magic that operated on desire and self-conception rather than straightforward force. It was elegant. He'd give Dumbledore that. The cursed energy under the corridor was the thing that had changed. For the first 2 months of term it had been steady, Quirrell's split signature moving through the castle, teaching badly, frightening students who hadn't learned yet to distinguish between genuine danger and performed incompetence, always oriented toward the third floor with the focused hunger of something that had been waiting a very long time. Harry had tracked it. Filed it. Waited. In December it had changed. It was more urgent now. The coiled quality that Harry had identified on the platform had tightened, like something being compressed toward a critical point. Whatever was inside Quirrell was running out of patience or running out of time or both, and the third-floor corridor was pulling at it the way a drain pulls at water. Harry walked past it on a Thursday morning in late December, the castle mostly empty because most students had gone home for Christmas, and the urgency was acute enough to have weight. That night, he told Ron and Hermione. They were in the common room, the three of them, which was otherwise empty, a fire going, the snow outside the windows doing its seasonal best, the tower quiet in the particular way of a house relieved to have fewer people in it. Ron was playing chess against himself with the focused enjoyment of someone who was good enough to make both sides try. Hermione was making notes with 3 books open simultaneously and the multitasking ease of someone who'd been doing this since she was 8. Harry sat in the middle armchair and said, "It's going to happen before the end of the year." Neither of them looked up immediately, which was something Harry appreciated about both of them. They processed first. Ron moved a knight. Quirrell making his move. Whatever is in Quirrell. Yes. Hermione looked up. How long? Months, maybe. Possibly sooner if whatever's controlling him gets impatient enough. So the question is whether we move before it does, she said. The question is whether I move before it does, Harry said. You two are adjacent to this. You don't have to be inside it. Ron looked up from the chessboard. His expression was the one he got when he'd decided something and wasn't going to negotiate about it, squared jaw, direct gaze, no performance. Harry. I know, Harry said. Do you? You're going to say you're in. I was going to say obviously we're in, and you saying otherwise is quite offensive. Ron moved another piece. We've been building up to this since September. Since the train, Hermione said, returning to her notes. I decided on the train. Harry looked at them both. At Ron's uncomplicated certainty, at Hermione's focused composure. He felt something that he recognized by now, the warm, settled weight of people who were with him not because of who he was supposed to be but because of who he actually was, and had decided that was worth something. "All right," he said. "Excellent," Ron said, and captured his own bishop. "Now tell us the actual plan." Harry told them the actual plan, which was less a plan than a prepared response. He wasn't going to go after the stone, he was going to wait for Quirrell to go after it and then address whatever came through the door. The stone was safer behind Dumbledore's security than it would be anywhere Harry could currently put it. The objective was not the stone. The objective was whoever was riding Quirrell. "You think it's Voldemort," Hermione said. "The magical signature is consistent with an extremely powerful wizard reduced to a parasitic state." Voldemort's known technique involved soul anchoring. Harry paused. "It's a method of extending life by dividing your soul. You hide the pieces in objects." Hermione set her pen down. "Horcruxes." He looked at her. "I found the reference in October," she said, with the tone of someone who had been sitting on difficult information and choosing her moment. Restricted section. The description of what a soul divided across multiple objects would feel like from an energy perspective matches exactly what you described about Quirrell. "How many?" Harry said. "The theory suggests any number is possible." "The most powerful form would require," she stopped. "The number doesn't matter right now. What matters is that if there's a piece of him in Quirrell and pieces elsewhere, killing the body doesn't end it." "I know," Harry said. Ron had stopped playing chess. He was looking between them with the expression of someone following a conversation that kept revealing new flaws. "So when you fight Quirrell, I'll end whatever is possessing him," Harry said. "The Voldemort piece specifically. The Quirrell problem resolves itself after that. The body can't survive without the thing animating it." Is that killing?" Ron said. Not judgmentally. "Just asking." "It's removing something that is already dead from something that is barely alive," Harry said. He said it evenly, the way Gojo said difficult things, not to reduce their weight but because reducing them didn't help anyone. "I've felt what's in Quirrell. It doesn't have the quality of something that could survive on its own. It needs the stone. Without it, it has nothing." Ron nodded slowly. He picked up a chess piece, looked at it, put it back. "Right." The fire crackled. Outside the snow kept falling, indifferent to the conversation. "Harry," Hermione said, quietly. "Yeah. When you go in." "You're not going to," she stopped, organized herself, tried again. "You're going to be careful." Harry looked at her. At the precise, controlled worry on her face, which she wore like she wore everything, directly, without pretense, not trying to make it look like something else. "I'll be fine," he said. "I know you'll be fine. I'm saying be careful anyway. Those are different things." "They are different things," Harry agreed. She went back to her notes. Ron said, "Chess," to Harry. "You'll win." "I know. You've been getting better though." Harry sat across from him and moved a pawn, and the fire kept going, and Hogwarts breathed around them in the deep quiet of a castle that had been watching people grow up inside it for 1,000 years and had, by now, developed opinions about the ones worth watching. The holidays came and went. Most students returned in January. The castle filled up again with its usual noise, its competing energies, its daily rhythm of bells and meals and classes and the specific social weather of young people living in close proximity for extended periods. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who'd been navigating complex social environments since he was 6, not performing ease, actually having it, which was different. Draco Malfoy had been trying to establish dominance since September with the commitment of someone running a long campaign. He'd tried social pressure first, the Weasley poverty angle, the Hermione's blood status angle, the you should be with us angle, and each time it had failed to land because Harry simply didn't have the necessary social anxieties to make any of those levers functional. He tried academic one-upmanship, which was so non-competitive that even Malfoy seemed to lose enthusiasm for it after the first month. He'd tried Quidditch mockery, which Harry deflected by being genuinely the best flyer in first year and not caring about Malfoy's opinion of that. In February he tried a direct approach, in the corridor after potions, which was the class where their mutual dislike had the most daily exposure due to seating proximity. Potter. Malfoy fell into step beside him with the easy confidence of someone who had decided this time would be different. Crabbe and Goyle arranged themselves in the formation they used when they were trying to look like a consequence rather than furniture. "I've been thinking." "Have you?" Harry said, walking. "About what you actually are." Malfoy pitched his voice for significance. "Everyone here thinks you're the famous Harry Potter. The chosen one, all of that. But that's not really what's interesting about you." Harry kept walking. "What's interesting," Malfoy continued, "is that you're something different. Something that doesn't fit the regular categories. I've been doing research." He said it the way some people say I've been consulting experts, with the weight of delegated effort. "The energy techniques you use aren't standard wizarding magic." Harry glanced at him. "No." Malfoy seemed encouraged by the actual response. "So what are you?" "Currently on my way to lunch." "I mean, I know what you mean." Harry stopped. Turned to face him, not because the conversation required it but because he'd decided it was more efficient to finish it properly than to let it trail. Malfoy had the look of someone who'd been building toward this for months, and the Malfoy family was not stupid. The research comment was real, and the interest was real, and Harry had a sense that this interaction had more layers than its surface suggested. "You're trying to work out whether I'm an asset or a threat." Malfoy's expression did something complicated. "To your family's interests," Harry continued. "You've been watching me all year and you can't categorize me, and that's uncomfortable for someone who's been raised in a world where categories determine everything." He looked at him evenly. "For what it's worth, I'm neither. I'm not playing that game. Everyone's playing that game." "No," Harry said. "Everyone you've met is playing that game. That's a smaller set." Malfoy stared at him. Behind him, Crabbe and Goyle looked confused, which was standard. But Malfoy's expression had moved past the performed confidence into something more genuine, not quite respect, not quite uncertainty, but somewhere in the territory between them. "My father says you'll need allies," Malfoy said. "Your father's been saying that for a year. He says the war isn't over." "It's not," Harry said. "But the side he's planning to back has already lost and doesn't know it yet." He kept his voice completely level. "Not threatening, not performing. Tell your father that." He walked away. Behind him, Malfoy said nothing, which was more interesting than anything he could have said. Ron, catching up from 2 steps behind where he'd been watching the whole exchange with barely contained delight, said, "You just told Draco Malfoy that his father picked the wrong horse." "I told him something true," Harry said. "What he does with it is up to him. You know he's going to make your life difficult." "Probably." Harry turned a corner. "But he's going to think about it first. That buys time." Hermione materialized on Harry's other side from what appeared to be an alcove she had specifically inhabited for this purpose. "The part where you said the war isn't over, it isn't. And that Voldemort has already lost, he has." She matched his pace. "You don't know that yet." "I know what I am," Harry said. "And I know what he is. The math works." She looked at him. He looked ahead. There was a silence with the quality of someone deciding whether this was arrogance or genuine calculation, and then Hermione, who had been running the same math independently and arriving at the same answer, said, "Fair enough." Ron ate 3 sandwiches at lunch and declared the whole interaction the best thing he'd witnessed since September, and Harry drank his pumpkin juice and let the afternoon proceed. It was Hermione who first noticed the smell, in April. They were returning from the library past the 3rd floor at 9:15 on a Tuesday evening, technically past curfew, but Harry had long since established the habit of moving through Hogwarts after hours with the same casual confidence he used everywhere, and the castle seemed to have collectively decided not to obstruct him. Even Mrs. Norris, who tended to find people with a forensic dedication that Gojo would have found professionally impressive. Hermione stopped. She said, "Do you smell that?" Harry stopped. He smelled it. Not a scent exactly, more a quality in the air, a vibration at the edge of the physical. The specific wrong note frequency of cursed energy under stress, the thing he associated with Quirrell but amplified, pressurized, building toward something. "It's today," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "Today. He's going for it tonight." Harry turned toward the third-floor corridor. "Go back to the common room. Harry, get Ron. Tell him to stay there. Stay with him." He looked at her directly. "I need you where I can find you after." She looked like she wanted to argue and was making a deliberate decision not to. "How long?" "I don't know. If you're not back by dawn, go to McGonagall. Tell her everything." He held her eyes. "She needs to know. If I haven't handled it, she does." Hermione said, "Come back." "I'll come back." She turned and walked fast toward the stairs, and Harry turned toward the corridor and walked the other direction, and behind him he heard her pace pick up to something between a walk and a run, and then nothing, and he was alone in the third-floor corridor with the smell of wrong energy growing stronger with every step. The door was already open. Not broken, opened carefully, opened with knowledge, the lock turned by someone who'd had months to study it. Harry walked through into the room where the dog waited. It was asleep. Not drugged, subdued, the difference being that something had communicated with it on a frequency it understood, and it had responded the way any creature responds to something that knows its language. Harry walked past it without touching it, found the trapdoor, and went down. The layers of security were exactly as he'd mapped them. Sprout's devil's snare, he passed through it using the spatial manipulation technique, the tendrils finding no surface to grip as the space around him refused to be available. The flying keys were already caught, the door already open. The chess pieces, already defeated, the pieces standing in the arrangement of a completed game. Someone had been through here. Recently. The energy trail was warm. The potion room. The logic puzzle. Snape's row of bottles sitting exactly where they should be except one was empty. Harry looked at the remaining bottles, ran the logic in 12 seconds, identified the correct one, and drank it. The door was cold. On the other side was a large room with a single object in it and a man standing in front of it. The mirror of Ariste was taller than Harry had expected, its frame ornate and slightly overwrought in the way of very old magical objects that had been made when ornamentation was considered structurally necessary. The glass was dark except for the reflection it showed, which was not the room. Quirrell was standing in front of it with both hands pressed against its frame, and his reflection was not his reflection, and the quality of energy around him had crossed from contained to desperate in a way that filled the room with something that tasted like metal and old rage. "You won't get it from the mirror that way," Harry said. Quirrell spun around. In the months since September, Harry had watched the split in Quirrell's signature carefully, the human portion diminishing as the parasitic portion grew, the way a shadow grows as the light shifts. What was left now was barely the professor at all. The stutter was gone. The performance of harmlessness was gone. What was left was something that was very precisely focused on Harry and had been focused on Harry since the platform in September, since before that, since the moment the magical world had arranged itself around the shape of a prophecy and started pointing at a specific small person. "Potter," Quirrell said. "Professor," Harry said. "He said you were strong." Quirrell took a step toward him. The energy around him was coiling, tightening, taking the shape of a strike. "He said you were different. I told him a child was still a child." "You were wrong," Harry said pleasantly. "Remove the boy," said a second voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the quality of the air itself, from the space between things. It was cold in the specific way that things that have burned out completely are cold, not the cold of absence but the cold of something that has passed through heat so total that the other side of it is a kind of permanent winter. Harry had heard many varieties of dangerous energy in 6 years of training. He had never heard anything with this particular quality of will, this razor-directed certainty, this enormous concentrated hunger stripped down to its essential mechanism. He felt it target him. Felt the shape of its assessment, faster than human thought, more complete, reading him with the specific capability of something ancient and intelligent and entirely uninterested in being gentle about it. Then, briefly, he felt it hesitate. Harry was interested in the hesitation. He filed it. "Show yourself," Harry said. Quirrell reached up with both hands and began unwinding the turban. Behind Harry, the mirror's magic pressed at the back of his neck like a warm hand. It was showing him something, reaching for whatever he most desired to show it to him. He didn't look. He kept his eyes on Quirrell. If you let a mirror tell you what you wanted, you'd spend the rest of your life in front of it, which was probably true of most things that offered to show you your desires. Quirrell's turban fell. On the back of his head was a face. It was chalk-white and noseless, with red eyes that had the flat, unblinking quality of things that had spent a long time existing without a body, that had grown accustomed to existence as pure will and found the constraints of a human face inconvenient. It was the face of someone who had made a specific series of choices and followed them to their absolute conclusion, and the conclusion was this: something that had been brilliant and had decided that the only honest response to brilliance was the elimination of every limitation, including the ones that made you human. Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. Not with surprise. With the tone of someone confirming a calculation. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. The red eyes moved. Not physically, the expression behind them shifted. Something that had been very still became fractionally less still. "No one calls me that." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I did." Quirrell, Voldemort, moved. The curse was fast, wordless, red, and aimed with the precision of someone who had cast it thousands of times and knew exactly what it did. Harry moved without deciding to move, the body acting on 6 years of trained instinct, and the curse passed through the space where he'd been and met the wall behind. The return was not a curse. Harry brought infinity up, not fully, not the full construction that was his infinite void, but the edge of it, the spatial refusal that made the air around him into something unavailable, and walked forward into Quirrell's reach, and put his hand on Quirrell's face. The effect was immediate and total. It was not what Harry had planned, which had been a calculated application of force. What happened instead was that the moment his skin touched Quirrell's, the Elder Wand's resonance and Harry's own power completed a circuit that neither of them had been fully aware was open, and what flowed through that circuit was not magic in the standard sense but something that the infinite void technique had been building toward since it first formed, a direct interface with the spatial structure of the thing before him. Voldemort screamed. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was the noise a concept makes when it encounters something that doesn't accept its premise. The soul fragment inside Quirrell, and it was a fragment, Harry could feel the severed edges of it, the ragged quality of something torn rather than divided, found the boundaries of itself suddenly, completely legible in a way it had never been, every surface of it exposed to something that could see it clearly and had decided what to do. Quirrell's hands burned where Harry touched them. He tried to pull away. He couldn't, not because Harry was holding him, but because the infinity field had done something spatial to the interface between them that made pulling away geometrically complicated. "What are you?" Voldemort said, through Quirrell's burning mouth, and it was the first time Harry had heard genuine uncertainty in the voice, the first crack in the flat, cold certainty. "I told you," Harry said. "Harry Potter." He pushed. Not physically. He pushed the infinite void outward in a single directed application, a compression and then a release, the technique finding the soul fragment at the center of Quirrell's double-inhabited body and treating it the way you treat an irregularity, with precise, sufficient, targeted force. The mirror behind him flared. The room went dark and then very bright and then dark again. Quirrell collapsed. The body hit the stone floor and stayed there, and the quality of the room changed immediately and completely, the way a room changes when something that had been filling it with pressure suddenly leaves. The cold will presence, the enormous ancient hunger, the flat red eyes, gone. Not destroyed. Harry knew they weren't destroyed. The soul fragment was dissolved, but the thing it was a fragment of had other anchors, and he could feel them distantly, faint and scattered, like embers from a fire that had been stamped out in one place. But not here. Not tonight. Harry stood in the center of the room and breathed. The mirror was still doing its thing, showing him what he desired, pressing warmth at the back of his head. He turned and looked at it, because it was there and because he was curious. His reflection looked back at him. It was himself, no older, nothing added. No dead parent standing behind him. No great destiny visually represented. Just Harry, round glasses, hair going everywhere, the elder wand visible in his reflection's jacket. Standing next to him in the reflection, eating what appeared to be a croissant, was Gojo. Harry looked at this for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket, withdrew the elder wand, turned it over in his hand once, and put it back. He knelt down and checked Quirrell's pulse. There wasn't one. He closed Quirrell's eyes with 2 fingers, which was the only ceremony he could offer and the only one that seemed right, and stood up. Behind him, the door at the top of the staircase opened and footsteps came down, quick, controlled, the specific cadence of someone moving fast but not panicking. Dumbledore walked into the room. He took in the scene, Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing over him, the mirror showing whatever it was showing, with a single sweeping look that missed nothing. His expression did not change but the quality behind his eyes did, moving through several things rapidly before arriving at a composed exterior that Harry suspected had taken decades to perfect. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor." Dumbledore walked toward Quirrell's body. He checked what Harry had checked. He straightened up and looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses with an expression that was part sorrow, part calculation, part something genuine that lived underneath both of those. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "What happened?" Harry told him what had happened. Factually, clearly, without editorializing. He watched Dumbledore's face as he told it and noted the things that landed with recognition. Dumbledore had known about the soul fragment, had known about the possession, had known this was coming, and the thing that landed differently. "The infinite void," Dumbledore repeated, when Harry described the technique. "It found the soul fragment and resolved it," Harry said. "Resolved it," Dumbledore said. "Dissolved the fragment." The primary consciousness retreated. Dumbledore looked at him. "You're describing Voldemort's soul." "Part of it." "Yes." "And you knew what you were doing." "I knew what the technique would do," Harry said. "I didn't know the interface with the Elder Wand would amplify it." That was informative. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the mirror. He looked at Quirrell. He looked at Harry. "Harry," he said, with the weight of a man beginning a sentence he had written and rewritten many times, "there are things I need to tell you. I know about the Horcruxes," Harry said. The silence that followed was very complete. Dumbledore looked at him. The expression behind the half-moon glasses finally showed something undisguised, not quite shock, because Dumbledore was too controlled for pure shock, but the close relative of it that lived in a man who has planned meticulously and encountered a variable he hadn't accounted for. "Do you?" he said softly. "Not all of them. Not where they are yet. But the theory." "Yes." Harry held the old man's eyes. "I know you've been working on it. I know the plan involves finding and destroying them. I know the plan also involves," he paused, and held the pause the way Gojo had taught him to hold difficult things, with steadiness rather than force, "a final piece that you haven't told me about yet." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The fire at the edges of the room cast long shadows, and Quirrell's empty body was on the floor between them, and the mirror was still doing its work, and Hogwarts was breathing around them with the particular patience of a very old building that had seen many conversations of consequence and was prepared to house one more. No, Dumbledore said, finally. I haven't. I know, Harry said. And you know why? Yes. Then, you're going to tell me, Harry said. Not tonight. I don't need it tonight. But before the end, you're going to tell me everything you know and let me decide what to do with it. He looked at Dumbledore the way he'd looked at the stars on the first night, with the full, uncomplicated attention of someone who was not afraid of what they saw. Because it's my life, Professor. And I'm the one who gets to decide what it's for. Dumbledore looked at him. The half-moon glasses reflected the mirror's light. The great, accumulated weight of his magic, the decades of power and planning and genuine, complicated love for the world he was trying to protect, sat in the room around him like something he'd been carrying for so long it had become his shape. He said, very quietly, "You're not what I expected." "I know," Harry said. "I've been told." "Who raised you like this?" Harry thought about the hotel room at 1:15 in the morning. The stars through London's light. The two large white sunglasses on a 5-year-old nose. The mat in the Tokyo flat at 7 a.m. Cold noodles eaten over a sink. A cake with 11 candles and someone who had counted. "Someone who taught me everything," he said. Dumbledore nodded once. It was the nod of a man updating something fundamental, the kind of internal revision that doesn't show much on the outside because the work is happening too deep. "The stone," he said. "Still in the mirror," Harry said. "I didn't take it. I don't want it." Dumbledore looked at the mirror. Then back at Harry. Something that might have been a much younger version of his smile moved across his face briefly. "Quite right," he said. They walked out of the chamber together, past the chess pieces and the potions and the devil's snare and the flying keys, up through the trapdoor past the sleeping dog, out into the third-floor corridor where the air tasted normal again. At the top of the stairs Dumbledore said, "You should go to the hospital wing." "Madame Pomfrey should, I'm not hurt," Harry said. "As a precaution." "I'll go tomorrow," Harry said. "Tonight I have people waiting for me." Dumbledore looked at him. Then he stepped aside. Harry walked up toward Gryffindor Tower. Behind him, Dumbledore stood in the corridor for a long moment before moving in the other direction, and Hogwarts breathed around both of them, and the night was deep and still and full of everything that had just changed. The common room had exactly 2 people in it. Ron was sitting on the floor with his back against the armchair, facing the door, completely awake, with the chess set beside him untouched. Hermione was in the armchair with a book open on her lap that she had clearly not been reading, because her eyes were on the door. Harry walked in. Hermione was out of the armchair and across the room before he'd fully closed the portrait. She stopped a foot from him and looked at his face with the analytical precision she brought to everything, checking for damage with the systematic thoroughness of someone running an examination. "You're not hurt," she said. "I'm not hurt." "Quirrell?" "Gone." "Voldemort?" "Also gone. For now." He looked at her. "Did I tell you I'd come back?" "You did," she said. "I still worried." "I know." Harry looked at Ron. Ron was still on the floor, the picture of someone who had decided sitting was the best response to a situation he couldn't control. "Well?" Ron said. "It's done," Harry said. "For now." Ron exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that had been collecting since 9:15 p.m. and had a lot of material in it. "Good," he said. "Brilliant. Excellent." He picked up a chess piece. "Do you want to play?" "I'm not tired." Harry sat down on the floor across from him. Hermione sat back in her armchair. The fire was still going. Outside the windows, the grounds of Hogwarts were dark and still, and the enchanted sky above the great hall was cycling through its spring stars, and somewhere below them in the chamber that had been the stage for the evening's main event, a mirror was showing its own reflection now that no one was standing in front of it, just the empty room, and the stone floor, and the specific settled silence of a place where something significant has happened and the air has taken note. Harry moved a pawn. Ron moved a knight. Hermione turned a page she still wasn't reading. Harry, Hermione said, without looking up. Yeah. When you were in there. What did the mirror show you? Harry moved another piece. Ron's knight took it without hesitation. Gojo, Harry said. Eating a croissant. A pause. That's it? Ron said. That's it. Ron looked at the board. He looked at Harry. He said, in the tone of someone trying to work out whether this was profound or anticlimactic, "Bats, is that a good sign or a bad sign?" Neither, Harry said. It's just true. Hermione made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. Outside, Hogwarts breathed. The stars kept going. And in the common room of Gryffindor Tower, 3 first-years sat around a chessboard and let the night wind down, which was exactly the right thing to do. Chapter 5, The Shape of Fear. The summer lasted exactly 4 days before Harry stopped going outside. Not because Surrey had suddenly become appealing. The Dursleys had received exactly one communication from the wizarding world, a stern letter from the Ministry reminding them of their legal obligation as Harry's registered magical guardians, which Dumbledore had apparently arranged before Harry could clarify that he had no intention of returning there, but because Gojo's flat in Shinjuku had, in Harry's absence, achieved a state of entropy that suggested it had been operating without adult supervision, which was technically accurate. The refrigerator contained 1 beer, hot sauce, and an optimistic container of leftover ramen from what the smell suggested was somewhere between 3 and 9 days ago. I called Shoko, Harry said, standing in the kitchen with his trunk still by the door. I ate at Shoko's sometimes, Gojo said, from the couch. Nanami? A pause. Nanami ate alone. Harry looked at him. Gojo was lying with his feet over the armrest and his sunglasses pushed up onto his forehead and looked, for someone who had just been reunited with his ward after 9 months, entirely comfortable with the current situation. I was gone for a school year, Harry said. You were. Time moves differently when you're bored. Were you bored? Constantly. Gojo looked at the ceiling. There were missions. There was paperwork. Yaga tried to send me to a conference in Kyoto and I told him I'd go if he admitted the conference was unnecessary, which he didn't, so I didn't go. What happened? There was a conference in Kyoto. Gojo. I sent a very good apology note. Harry opened the refrigerator again, looked at its contents, closed it, and opened the cupboards, which contained instant noodles and approximately 40 individual packets of dashi stock and nothing else of consequence. He looked at these. He began making a mental shopping list with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this since he was 7. The Quirrell thing, Gojo said. Yes. You didn't tell me. It was resolved before I had a chance to tell you and then I thought the end of term wasn't the right time to, Harry. Harry set down the dashi packet. He turned around. Gojo was sitting up now, feet on the floor, sunglasses back on. He was looking at Harry with the expression that had no performance in it, the one that only came out in the flat, in the small hours, when there was no one watching and no point pretending. Walk me through it, Gojo said. Everything. Harry walked him through it. Everything, Quirrell on the platform, the mapping of the corridor, the soul fragment theory, Hermione's research, the night in the chamber, the mirror, the moment with the Elder Wand and the technique and what had happened at the interface. Gojo listened without interrupting, which was unusual. He sat with his elbows on his knees and let Harry talk, and when Harry was done he was quiet for long enough that the silence had texture. The amplification at the interface, he said. Between the void and the wand. I didn't know it would do that. But it makes sense in retrospect. Yes. Gojo nodded slowly. He was doing the thing where he was working through something technical at the same time as something else, the parallel processing that Harry had learned to recognize by the quality of the stillness. The Elder Wand's affinity is for power, specifically for whoever holds the most concentrated magical force in a given situation. Your technique is spatial. It interfaces with the structure of things. When both of those made contact with a soul fragment, it read the fragment, Harry said. All of it, all at once. And the wand amplified the output to match what it found. Which was enough to dissolve it. Yes. Gojo exhaled. Not dramatically, just a long, steady breath. And Dumbledore knows I know about the Horcruxes. Doesn't know how much I know. Harry paused. He has a plan. I can feel the shape of it. He's been building it for years and it has a specific endpoint. An endpoint involving you. Yes. Gojo looked at him. Tell me what you think the endpoint is. Harry had been thinking about this since April, since the night in the chamber, since the moment in the corridor when Dumbledore had said there are things I need to tell you, and Harry had watched the shape of the words he hadn't said yet and read the silhouette of them. He thinks I have to die, Harry said. Or, not die exactly. He thinks there's a piece of Voldemort in me. A Horcrux he didn't mean to make. He thinks to destroy Voldemort completely I have to be the one to let it be destroyed, which means, walking into it, Gojo said. Yes. And you think he's right? I think he's working from the best information he has, Harry said carefully. I think the piece of Voldemort's soul that ended up in me is real. I can feel it sometimes, the edges of it. Like something that doesn't quite match the architecture of everything else. Gojo was looking at him with an expression that Harry had seen before, on the night train from Kyoto, and knew to mean that Gojo was holding something large and was choosing carefully how to handle it. But, Gojo said. But Dumbledore's plan requires me to be passive about it, Harry said. To walk toward a specific end and let it happen to me. And I think, he stopped, organized the thought, tried again. I think the plan was built around a Harry Potter who'd been raised in a cupboard. Who was frightened and guilty and attached to the idea of sacrifice because sacrifice was the only power he'd ever been offered. He looked at his hands. That's not what I am. No, Gojo agreed. It isn't. Which means there's another way. Harry looked up. The void can read the structure of things. The fragment in me, it has edges. It's not integrated. It's sitting in a space that my own architecture has been growing around without touching, the way a tree grows around a piece of metal. You think you can remove it yourself? I think I can remove it in a way that doesn't require dying, Harry said. If I can find the right moment. The right conditions. If the void is developed enough. Gojo was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and put a takeout menu on the counter. Call Shoko, he said. Ask her to come tomorrow. Why? Because she's the best medical practitioner I know, and I want her to look at the edges of that fragment, and I want her opinion before I give you mine. Harry looked at him. At the deliberate practical action, the drawer, the menu, the tomorrow, which was Gojo's method of making space for something important without being dramatic about it. Okay, Harry said. And order food. Gojo picked up his phone. I'm going to call Nanami. Tell him about the conference. He already knows about the conference. He needs to be told I know I was wrong about the conference. Is that an apology? It's an acknowledgement, Gojo said, which was apparently the distinction that mattered. He walked to the window and dialed, and Harry ordered enough food for 3 people from a place 2 streets over, and the flat settled back into its version of normal, which had always been slightly louder and considerably less tidy than other people's normal and was, for that reason, the version that felt most like home. Shoko came the next morning and spent 40 minutes doing things with her hands that produced a soft diagnostic light and a series of expressions Harry had learned to read over the years as her professional face cycling between interesting, concerning, and I see what you mean. When she was done she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and said, You're right about the edges. It's not integrated. It's been sitting in the same space since you were an infant and your own power has been developing around it like the tree metaphor. Can it be removed? Harry said. I don't know, Shoko said, which from her meant more than it would from someone else, because Shoko knew a great deal and was precise about the limits of it. What I can tell you is that it's not damaging you. It's been there your whole life and the architecture you've built has accommodated it, worked around it. She looked at Gojo. If he can interface with his own internal structure the way he interfaced with the external one in the chamber, he can, Gojo said. Then maybe. She wrapped her hands around her mug. The risk is that the fragment is load-bearing in ways that aren't obvious until you try to remove it. Some things hold shapes they shouldn't because they've been incorporated long enough to become structural. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. This isn't urgent. You have time to be careful about it. I know, Harry said again. I'm saying it more than once because I know who raised you, Shoko said, with a specific look at Gojo, who pointed at the window as though something outside required his attention. Harry stayed in Tokyo for 8 weeks. They were the best 8 weeks of his year, which he thought about sometimes as the summer moved toward September. The fact that the time that didn't have structure or agenda or anything in particular that needed to happen was consistently better than the time that did, not because he wanted nothing to happen but because in Tokyo the things that happened were chosen. He trained every morning. The infinite void had developed over the school year in ways that were visible to him even if they weren't always visible to an observer, deeper, more specific, more capable of precision work at close range. He'd been using the school year as a field test and the results had been informative. Range was excellent. Structural analysis was excellent. The targeted application he'd used in the chamber was new and wanted more practice. He spent 3 hours a day on wizarding magic, working through techniques he'd identified during the year as worth developing. The spatial interface between his cursed energy and his wizarding magic had stabilized over the school year into something that was genuinely its own category, neither jujutsu nor wizarding, but a hybrid that operated on both systems simultaneously. He'd been writing up the theoretical framework in a notebook that was now its 3rd volume, partly for his own clarity and partly because Hermione had requested he document everything when he'd mentioned it in a letter. Hermione wrote excellent letters. Long, dense, structured, always with 3 questions appended. Ron wrote letters that were shorter and more interesting in the way that chaotic communication was often interesting, full of family news and Quidditch opinions and the occasional observation about his older brothers that was funnier for being clearly unintentional. Harry wrote back to both of them with the regularity of someone who had decided that keeping in contact with people who mattered was a non-negotiable feature of his schedule. In late July a letter arrived that wasn't from either of them. It was ministry-headed, formally worded, and concerned the issue of Harry's current guardianship arrangement and his intended legal domicile. Apparently the wizarding world had noticed that Harry Potter was not residing with his magical guardians and was registered as residing overseas with a non-wizard individual, and someone in the ministry had decided this required an opinion. Harry read the letter twice and handed it to Gojo. Gojo read it once and said, "Who do I write to?" "You're going to write to them." "I'm going to write at them," Gojo said, which was different, and picked up a pen. The letter he sent was 3 sentences. Harry didn't read it before it went out, and Gojo didn't read him the contents. 3 days later a response arrived that was single paragraph, formal, and conveyed the specific quality of a bureaucratic entity that had attempted to assert itself, encountered something unexpected, and decided the matter was resolved. "What did you say to them?" Harry asked. "That I was his legal guardian of record in his country of primary residence, that he was receiving exceptional education both in Japanese and British magical traditions, and that any further correspondence on the subject should be directed to my attorney." Gojo considered. "I don't actually have an attorney." Gojo. "But they don't know that." Harry decided this was fine. The return to Hogwarts in September felt different from the first time. He knew the station now, knew the weight of the platform and the specific quality of the train's engine as it built toward 11 o'clock, and the familiarity of it was good in the way that only familiarity built from experience could be good. He found Ron and Hermione in the usual carriage and the 3 of them slipped back into their rhythm with the ease of people who had spent a school year developing exactly the right calibration for each other. Hermione had spent the summer reading and had 3 new notebooks and a developed theory about the spatial technique that she wanted to compare against Harry's documentation. Ron had spent the summer at the Burrow and had the specific healthy density of someone who had eaten real food and played outside and generally operated like a human being was supposed to operate. "You look better," Ron said, looking at Harry critically. "I look the same. You look less coiled. Last year you were always," he made a gesture that apparently meant about to handle something. "There was something to handle," Harry said. "And now?" "Now there'll be something else to handle," Harry said. "Eventually." Ron found this satisfying. He ate a pasty. Hermione opened one of her notebooks. The train moved through the countryside and England unrolled outside the window in its September version, still green but with the gold beginning to come in at the edges, the light lower and more considered than summer light, the whole landscape in the process of deciding to change. Something new had arrived in the compartment doorway. Harry felt it before the door opened, a piece of paper that was also not a piece of paper, that had a magical signature with the specific density of something that had been written by someone with enormous and somewhat uncontrolled power in a state of high distress. A folded note slid under the compartment door. Harry picked it up. Opened it. "Something's wrong with the school. They put something there. I found it. Don't tell the teachers. Come to Hagrid's first thing." The handwriting was large and slightly uneven and entirely identifiable as Hagrid's. "Hagrid?" Ron said, reading over his shoulder. "He found something," Harry said. "In the school," Hermione said, reading from the other side. Harry folded the note. He looked out the window at the passing landscape and thought about what had been different when he'd returned to Hogwarts this summer in the context of things that might need finding. He thought about Dumbledore's careful on-game planning. He thought about the year before and the piece of Voldemort that had come and failed and retreated. He thought about the Horcruxes. He thought about how a fragment of a soul that needed a host might look for another one, having lost the last. "Something written," Harry said. Hermione looked at him sharply. "A vessel." "What?" Ron said. "A Horcrux," Harry said. "A written one. Something that could introduce itself slowly. Build trust. Be given to someone who wouldn't know what it was." He looked at Hermione. "If you were going to put a soul fragment in something that could operate inside a school, a diary," Hermione said. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who has just assembled pieces that have been laid out in front of them for a moment. "A diary that could write back. That's a thing." Ron said. "Tom Riddle would think so," Harry said. He felt the Elder Wand's resonance through his jacket, steady, warm, familiar. "We need to find out who has it before it finds out who to use." "Ginny," Ron said suddenly. They both looked at him. He looked slightly pale. "She got a diary. Second hand. Someone put it in her cauldron at Madame Malkin's this summer. She's been quieter than usual, since September started. I thought she was nervous about first year." His voice had the quality of someone running backward through a series of memories and finding new meaning in all of them. "Who gave it to her?" Hermione said. "She didn't know. It was just there." Harry stood up. "We need to get to Ginny before she does anything else with it." "It's a diary, Harry, it's a soul fragment that writes back," Harry said. "And if it's been corresponding with her since summer, it's had 3 months to work out what she responds to." Ron was on his feet before Harry finished the sentence. They found Ginny Weasley in the 4th carriage, sitting alone, with a worn black diary in her lap. She was not writing in it. She was just holding it, with the loose, slightly absent quality of someone in the middle of a thought that had taken them somewhere they hadn't intended to go. She looked up when they came in and the absent quality shifted, became more present, with the faintly defensive instinct of someone who's been interrupted doing something private. "Ron," she said. "What? Give me the diary," Harry said. Ginny looked at him. She was small and red-haired and 11 years old, and she'd been given something that told her it understood her, that she was interesting, that the things she felt were real and worth articulating, and she'd held onto it for the same reason Harry had written his name on a wall at 5 years old, because something had looked at her and said, "I see you." "It's mine," she said. "I know," Harry said, and kept his voice even and direct, not gentle exactly but not sharp, the tone he used for things that required being real about. "I know it's yours and I know why you like it. But it's not just a diary, Ginny. There's something in it that shouldn't be there, and it's going to hurt you if we don't take it." Ginny looked at the diary. Her hands tightened on it. "It listens," she said. "It actually listens." "I know. Most things don't actually listen, Ginny." Harry crouched down so they were at the same level. She had the Weasley eyes, that bright particular blue, and they were doing the thing where a young person who doesn't cry easily is deciding whether the current situation justifies it. The thing inside that diary is using your feelings to build something that will hurt you. It is not your friend, even if it acts like one. It is very old and very dangerous, and it picked you specifically because you're good and you feel things deeply, and those are qualities it can use. He held out his hand. "Please." She looked at his hand. She looked at the diary. Her jaw did the thing where someone's teeth are pressed together hard. Then she held out the diary and Harry took it. The moment it was in his hand he felt it, the soul fragment, denser and more coherent than the one in Quirrell had been, better preserved, less desperate. This one had been patient. This one had been building. He could feel the weeks of correspondence layered in the object like rings in a tree, each one a careful exchange, a gentle excavation of Ginny Weasley's loneliness and love and first-year anxieties. He felt something cold and purposeful move in the diary's energetic signature and orient toward him. "Potter," said the something, in a way that was not sound. Harry looked at the diary. He kept his face completely neutral. "What is it?" Ron said, watching him. "It knows who I am," Harry said. "It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For me to touch it." Harry turned the diary over in his hand. It was unassuming. Black cover, slightly worn. The kind of thing that sat in a school bag for months without drawing attention. "He put something in here that specifically responds to me. He must have made this before," he stopped. Thought. Before he knew the first piece failed. This was the backup. "For getting into Hogwarts," Hermione said. "For getting to me. Specifically." Harry looked at Ginny. "Were you instructed to give this to anyone?" Ginny shook her head. Then, slowly, he suggested I leave it somewhere. "In the library. Where older students would find it." "Where I'd find it," Harry said. Ron said something colorful that his mother would have had opinions about. "It doesn't matter," Harry said. "We have it now." He held the diary and felt the soul fragment inside it running its assessment of him, the same cold will presence from the chamber, but younger, more complete, less eroded. This version of Tom Riddle hadn't been diminished by a decade of failed resurrection. This one had been preserved. "I need to destroy it." "How?" Hermione said. Harry thought about the chamber. About the interface between the void and the wand and what had happened when both made contact with a soul fragment. He thought about what Shoko had said, the risk is that the fragment is load-bearing in ways that aren't obvious until you try to remove it, and applied it to this context. The diary Horcrux was simpler than the one in Quirrell because it wasn't inside a living person. It was an object. Objects were clean. "I need something that can damage the object at a structural level," he said. "Something that isn't just physical." "Basilisk venom," Hermione said immediately, in the tone she used when she was reading from memory. "It's one of the most destructive magical substances known. Destroys magical objects at the enchantment level. It's in Fantastic Beasts, Chapter 14. Where would we get basilisk venom?" "There is no accessible source of," she stopped. Her eyes moved to a specific location in the middle distance, which was where they went when she was making a connection that was arriving faster than her composure could manage. Harry. What? The Chamber of Secrets, she said. It's real. Salazar Slytherin's chamber. He created a basilisk, a serpent of Slytherin, that lives beneath Hogwarts. I've been cross-referencing the petrification incidents from the school history. Petrification? Ron said. There were incidents in the 1940s, Hermione said, with the compressed speed of someone who has a lot of information and is managing how fast to release it. Students were petrified. The chamber was allegedly opened and closed without the monster being found. I think the basilisk is still there. I think Tom Riddle opened it in the 40s. She looked at Harry. And I think something opened it again this year. The train was pulling into Hogsmeade. The sky outside was the dark blue of late September evening, and the castle was doing its thing across the lake, enormous and lit and patient. Harry looked at the diary in his hand. He looked at Hermione. The chamber is real, he said. Yes. And you think it's already open? I think there's already something moving through the pipes, she said. I've been tracking the cold spots in the castle since September. There's a consistent thermal irregularity in the lower levels, something very large generating significant body heat in an enclosed space. Very large, Harry said. Basilisks can reach 60 feet, she said, which she said the way she said most alarming things, with a precision that was its own kind of composure. The myth says you can't look it directly in the eye. I know the myth, Harry said. Do you have a plan for that specifically? I'm working on it. The train stopped. The platform filled with noise and movement and the general beautiful chaos of several hundred people arriving somewhere. Harry pocketed the diary, which pulsed once with the specific quality of something that had made a decision, and stepped onto the platform. Hagrid found them before they found him, a large shadow moving against the platform lights, arriving with the urgent energy of someone who had been waiting for the train for reasons beyond the standard welcome back. Harry, he said, low, casting a look over his shoulder. Thank goodness. Something's been happening. In the pipes. And I found, he stopped. His eyes went to Harry's jacket pocket. You found it already. On the train, Harry said. Tell me about the pipes. Hagrid's cabin, 20 minutes later, contained 6 people, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Hagrid, and a chicken that appeared to live in the cabin and had opinions about the meeting but no standing to express them. Hagrid's fire was enormous and his furniture was sized accordingly, and Harry sat in a chair that came up to his shoulders and listened to Hagrid describe 3 months of unusual animal behavior, of roosters found dead, and this he said with a specific weight, of Mrs. Norris found petrified near the second-floor bathroom, of cold drafts from grates that had been sealed. The roosters, Hermione said. The crowing of a rooster is fatal to a basilisk. If something is killing the roosters, it's clearing its own counters, Harry said. Mrs. Norris was near the bathroom, Ron said. The bathroom on the second floor, that's Myrtle's bathroom. Moaning Myrtle, Hermione said. She looked at Harry. Myrtle died 50 years ago. In that bathroom. She said she saw a pair of yellow eyes near the sink. Her eyes, specifically. She paused. Not her direct reflection of them. She saw them through something reflective. A surface on the floor. She didn't die because she saw the basilisk directly, she died because she saw it indirectly, which means it was already in the pipes. The sink, Harry said. There's an entrance in the sink. I believe so, Hermione said. Hagrid was looking between them with the expression he wore when conversation moved faster than he could follow. How do you two know all this? She reads, Harry said. I sense. He took the diary out of his pocket. Hagrid. This is what you were trying to warn me about on the train. Hagrid looked at the diary. He nodded heavily. Found it's like before. Them objects that think. When I was at school, there was, Tom Riddle had one. This is Tom Riddle's, Harry said. Hagrid went very still. Then he looked at Harry with the expression of someone making a decision about whether to revise something they'd thought for 50 years. This was the plan all along, Harry said, not unkindly. Riddle's diary, in Ginny's cauldron, opening the chamber and setting the basilisk moving through the school. Building toward, what, exactly? He turned the diary over. What happens when the basilisk reaches the thing it's supposed to reach? The diary pulsed in his hand. Strongly this time. And then, with the specific quality of something that had run out of patience, the cover opened. Pages turned on their own. Writing appeared. Hello, Harry. Harry looked at the writing. He said, to the room, I'll be back in a moment. He took the diary to Hagrid's table and sat down with it separately, because what was in it was going to have a conversation with him and he'd rather it was one he controlled. He picked up Hagrid's quill. Tom, he wrote. You know who I am. Not a question. I knew who you were in September, Harry wrote. Before you knew what I was. A pause. The writing that appeared was slower, more considered. You're different from what I expected. People keep saying that. You destroyed my other piece. The one in Quirrell. Another pause. That was significant. Most adult wizards couldn't have done it. I know. You should be frightened of me. Why? The pause this time was longer. Because I am the most brilliant mind the wizarding world has produced in 5 centuries. Because I understand magic at a fundamental level that no living wizard can match. Because I have been working towards something for longer than you have been alive and I will not be stopped by a child. Harry looked at the page. He thought about what Gojo had said once, on a training day in the Shinjuku flat, when Harry had been 9 and had asked about the nature of strong opponents. The ones who are truly dangerous aren't the ones who know they're dangerous. They're the ones who've never been told no by something they couldn't eventually work around. They don't know how to think from a position of failure, so the first real no they meet breaks their whole model. Tom, Harry wrote. You keep saying I should be frightened, which suggests you're trying to make fear happen by asserting it rather than creating it. That means you don't actually know what to do with someone who isn't afraid of you. The longest pause yet. Then, I know what I'll do. What? I'll show you. The diary's pages went blank. Then the writing returned, but different, not Riddle's neat controlled hand but something faster, flowing, the handwriting of someone young, and Harry felt the temperature in the room change as the fragment inside the diary burned brighter, hotter, drawing from every preserved conversation within its pages, every night of correspondence with Ginny, every carefully banked piece of her longing and her loneliness. And from the pipes under Hogwarts, something moved. Harry closed the diary. He stood up. He turned to the room. It's coming up, he said. The basilisk? Ron said. Tonight. It's going to come through the bathroom on the 2nd floor. Harry looked at Hermione. We need to get there first. Harry, I'll handle it. You handle getting Ginny somewhere safe and away from anything it can see through. How do we get to the chamber if the entrance is in the sink and it's open with Parseltongue and you? Hermione stopped. You can speak Parseltongue. Since I was 8, Harry said. Gojo thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting. We neither of us mentioned it was unusual until Shoko heard me talking to a garden snake and explained the cultural context. Ron made a sound. You speak to snakes. Occasionally. And this is, Ron pinched the bridge of his nose with the expression of someone whose world keeps accommodating new information but is running low on available space. Fine. Fine. The sink. You open it. Then what? Then I go in, Harry said. Alone? I'd rather, Harry, Ron said, very clearly. We have had this conversation. I believe I mentioned it was offensive. Harry looked at him. At the squared jaw, the direct gaze, the Weasley stubbornness that was so deeply structural it had probably been there before Ron was born. He looked at Hermione, who had already picked up her bag with the specific efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this eventuality. "Fine," Harry said. "But Ginny stays here with Hagrid." Ginny, who had been sitting in the corner with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the diary in Harry's pocket, looked up. She looked like she wanted to argue, and then she looked at Ron, and she looked at the diary, and she said, very quietly, "Okay." The bathroom on the second floor was exactly as Hermione had described, cold, with the specific quality of cold that comes from something very large taking up space directly below the floor, a thermal signature like a mountain had relocated underground. Moaning Myrtle was not present, which seemed deliberate on her part and Harry respected it. The sink had a small carved snake on the tap that was invisible unless you knew to look. Harry looked at it and said something in Parseltongue, which sounded to Ron and Hermione like a long, sinuous sequence of sounds with no obvious word boundaries, and the sink moved. The pipe beneath descended. A shaft opened. "Down," Harry said. It was a long way down. The shaft was cold and damp and smelled of old stone and water and something that was alive and very large and somewhere below. Harry landed first, then Ron, then Hermione, and they were in a pipe that stretched in both directions in the specific darkness of underground, and the temperature was so cold you could see your breath. "Follow me," Harry said, and walked. They moved through the pipes for several minutes. Hermione had an illumination charm running, Ron had his wand out, Harry had his hands free because his wand was in his jacket and his other wand was against his chest and both of them knew what they were doing. The chamber opened ahead of them without warning. The pipe simply ended and the stone floor dropped away into an enormous vaulted space that had the quality of a place that had been built to impress, that had been constructed with the specific architectural intention of communicating enormity. Stone pillars rose in 2 rows the full height of the chamber. Carved serpents wound up each one, and the carvings had the quality of things made with love and obsession. At the far end, a great stone face, Slytherin's face, long and haughty and lit from beneath by some sourceless green light, watched the empty chamber with the patient contempt of someone who had been waiting for 500 years and had opinions about the waiting. Between the pillars, the basilisk was moving. 62 feet of it, by Harry's immediate estimate. Green-black scales that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. A head the size of a car. Moving through the chamber with the specific grace of something that had been designed over millions of years to be very good at one particular thing, and that thing was this. Its eyes were shut. Basilisks navigated by heat signature when their prey couldn't be looked at directly. It had shut its eyes because it had sensed them and didn't need them yet. "Eyes down," Harry said, quietly and clearly. "Don't look at it." Ron and Hermione both looked at the floor. Harry looked at the basilisk. He kept his gaze on its body, below the neck, which was safe, which the myths confirmed and which his own assessment of the creature's magical structure confirmed. He felt the diary pulse in his pocket, felt the soul fragment inside it directing the basilisk, a leash of will, a psychic connection that moved the animal like a hand moving a puppet. Riddle's memory in the diary was running this. The basilisk was the weapon and the diary was the hand on the weapon and the hand knew Harry was here. "Stop," Harry said, in Parseltongue. The basilisk stopped. The chamber went very still. Harry and the basilisk regarded each other, one with its eyes shut and navigating by heat, one with his eyes steady on its scales. "The human speaks," the basilisk said, in Parseltongue. "The snake listens," Harry said. "The one who commands says to move. The one who commands is using you." Harry walked forward, slowly, each step deliberate, the infinite void technique settling around him into its stable form, making the space immediately around him into the particular spatial construction that had a name now. "Do you know what you are to him? You're an instrument. He doesn't care about you." A long silence. Then, "I am the last of my kind." "I know. He says to move." "He's in a book," Harry said. "He can't hurt you. He can only instruct you." He stopped 10 feet from the enormous head. I'm asking you to stop. The basilisk turned its head. The closed eyes pointed at him, the head moving with a precision that had nothing to do with sight. You smell like power. Yes. Like very old power. The wand is old, Harry said. But I'm not. The one who commands says you must die. The one who commands, Harry said, is already dead. He reached into his jacket and took out the diary. He held it in front of him. He felt the soul fragment inside it register this, a surge of cold will, of ancient intelligence recalculating rapidly, of something that had expected a different configuration of events and was adapting in real time. The diary's pages opened again. You can't destroy me. You need the venom. You don't have the venom. Harry looked at the diary. He looked at the basilisk. He looked at the basilisk's fangs, which were long and ivory-colored and dripping with something that had the specific magical signature of an extremely destructive natural substance. Hermione, he said, in English. Yes, she said, from somewhere behind him. The fang is enough. I don't need the full venom gland. A pause. That's theoretically correct. A single fang would retain sufficient venom potency for, how are you going to get the fang? Harry turned back to the basilisk. He said, in Parseltongue, I need one of your fangs. The basilisk opened its mouth. Not all the way, partially, deliberately, in the controlled way of something that had assessed the situation and made a decision. One fang, the largest of the lower mandible, was visible. For the thing that commands, the basilisk said. For the thing that commands, Harry confirmed. He reached up and took the fang. It came free with the specific quality of something offered rather than taken, and Harry held it and turned back to the diary. He brought the fang down. The sound the diary made was not a sound you could describe to someone who hadn't heard it. It was the sound of a contained intelligence encountering sudden irresolvable discontinuity, not a scream and not silence but something in between them, something that came from everywhere in the chamber at once and then stopped absolutely. The diary went limp in Harry's hand. The pages, which had been moving, went still. The writing faded. The sense of presence, the cold will, the ancient intelligence, the fragment of Riddle's soul that had been preserved in this object since the 40s, dissolved, not slowly, not gradually, but immediately and completely, the way a flame goes out. Harry held the ruined diary. He felt the absence where the fragment had been. Behind him, Ron said, "Is it done?" "That piece is done," Harry said. "That piece," Ron repeated. "There are others," Harry said. "But not here. Not tonight." He looked at the basilisk. The basilisk had lowered its head to the stone floor and was lying still with the quality of something that had completed its function and was returning to its default state. Its eyes were still shut. "Thank you," Harry said, in Parseltongue. "The last of my kind," the basilisk said again. "Where do I go now?" Harry looked at the enormous chamber. At the stone pillars, the carved serpents, the face of Slytherin at the far end. He looked at the animal that had been trapped here for 500 years in service of something that had used it as a tool. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. A long silence. "There is water," the basilisk said. "In the deep stone. Below the chamber." "Go there," Harry said. The basilisk moved. It found a gap in the far wall, a crack in the stone that widened as it reached it, either by natural accommodation or by some older magic in the chamber that remembered when this creature had a different status, and it moved through and was gone. Harry stood in the empty chamber for a moment. He was holding a ruined diary and a basilisk fang, and behind him Ron and Hermione were slowly looking up from the floor, and above them Hogwarts was doing its thing, breathing and holding and being 1,000 years old in its particular patient way. "Harry," Hermione said. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression she'd worn on the night he'd come back from the chamber at the end of first year, the evaluative check for damage, the relief organized quickly into composure. Behind her, Ron was looking at the gap in the wall where the basilisk had gone with the specific expression of someone who was going to need considerable processing time. "Are you all right?" she said. "Yes." "The diary, gone." He looked at it. At the ruined cover, the blank pages. "That's two." "Two," she said. "Out of how many?" "I don't know yet." He put the diary and the phone in his bag. "But I will." She nodded. She picked up her bag. She looked at Ron, who was still looking at the gap in the wall. "Ron." "It was 60 feet, Ron said. "At least." 62, Harry said. 62, Ron said, with the tone of a man archiving a fact he will be telling people for the rest of his life. "Right." He turned around. "Let's go tell Dumbledore." Harry looked at him. "What?" Ron said. "We should tell Dumbledore. The chamber's open, a basilisk has been living under the school, there was a possessed diary, we should tell Dumbledore the chamber has been closed and the threat has been addressed," Harry said. "Because it has. He should know, he already knows about the Horcruxes," Harry said. "He's known for years. He's been planning around them. If I tell him I destroyed one tonight he'll update his plan and that's fine, but I want to understand the full picture before I give him information he can use to move pieces I haven't agreed to be." Ron looked at him. The processing was visible on his face, the working through of Harry's logic, the checking of it against Ron's own instincts, which were less strategic and more direct and frequently correct about different things. "Right," Ron said, eventually. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," Harry said. "Tonight we tell him the chamber is sealed." They walked back through the pipes. They climbed up through the shaft. They stood in the cold bathroom on the second floor with the tap sealed again above them and the school quiet around them. Harry looked at his hands. Clean. He felt the specific quality of the evening's work settling into the shape that significant things settled into, not completion, because there was no completion yet, but progress. A piece removed from the board. A variable changed. 2 down. He didn't know how many remained. He knew he was going to find out. He knew it was going to be complicated and probably dangerous and possibly going to involve a conversation with Dumbledore that required him to hold several difficult truths simultaneously without flinching. He was not afraid of that conversation. He was not afraid of much. "Hermione," he said. "Yes. That theory you had about the spatial technique and the soul fragment interface. The one in the notebook." "Yes. I want to review it tomorrow. I think with the chamber Horcrux as a data point I can extend the theory into a working framework for locating the others." Hermione was quiet for one beat. Then she opened her bag and took out the notebook and said, "I started extending it in August. Tell me where your framework diverges from mine." Ron looked at both of them. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back. "It's past midnight," he said. "I know," Harry said. "We almost died." "We were never going to die," Harry said. "But I understand the sentiment." Ron exhaled with the expression of a man who had signed up for something 6 months ago and was now understanding the full scope of his commitment. He sat down on the cold bathroom floor and said, "Right. Extended theory. Go." And Harry and Hermione sat on either side of him and talked through it while Hogwarts breathed around them and the night wore on toward morning, and somewhere below them, very far below, in the deep stone water that ran beneath everything, something very old and very last of its kind swam quietly in the dark. Chapter 6, What the Void Remembers. Dumbledore's office smelled like something between a library and a greenhouse, the accumulated scent of old paper and living things occupying the same space for a very long time. The portraits on the walls were mostly awake, which Harry found interesting. It was 7 in the morning, early enough that the castle was still in its pre-breakfast quiet, and most of the painted headmasters had roused themselves with the specific alertness of people who wanted to hear what was going to be said. Harry had come alone. Not because Ron and Hermione hadn't offered, they had, with the committed certainty that had become their default setting, but because this conversation needed to be between him and Dumbledore without the variable of other people present, and Harry had explained this on the walk back from the bathroom at 1 in the morning, and both of them had arrived at the same conclusion at roughly the same speed and agreed without argument. Dumbledore was already at his desk when Harry knocked and entered, which suggested he'd been expecting this visit and had simply been waiting for Harry to arrive at the decision to make it. He was wearing deep purple robes and reading something that he set aside with the unhurried composure of someone for whom all events occurred at their appropriate time. Fawkes was on the perch in the corner, watching Harry with the orange-eyed attention of a very old bird that had seen many mornings in this room and assessed them accordingly. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Sit down." Harry sat. He put his bag on the floor beside the chair and looked at Dumbledore across the desk and let the silence be a moment before filling it, because Gojo had once told him that the person who fills a silence first is usually the person who needed the silence filled, and Harry didn't need it filled. "The chamber has been sealed," Harry said. "The basilisk has been relocated. The diary Horcrux has been destroyed." Dumbledore was very still. Not the still of surprise, Harry noted. The still of someone receiving information they had not expected in this form and at this time and from this direction, and was doing the rapid internal work of revision. His eyes, behind the half-moon glasses, moved across Harry's face with the particular attention of someone who had spent decades reading people and was finding the current subject unusually difficult to read. "How?" Dumbledore said. "Basilisk Fong," Harry said. "Single Fong, retains sufficient venom potency to destroy the enchantment at the object's foundational level." He reached into his bag and put the ruined diary on the desk. "The Fong is also here, if you need it." Dumbledore looked at the diary. He reached out and picked it up with both hands and held it with the careful reverence of someone handling something that had once been very dangerous and was now the evidence of its own defeat. He turned it over. He opened the cover and looked at the blank pages. "You spoke to him," Dumbledore said. "Yes. He spoke to you. He was curious about what I was." Harry watched him. "And then he was afraid of what I was. He adapted quickly. Riddle is very fast, but the fear was there first. He didn't know how to be afraid of someone my age." Dumbledore set the diary down slowly. He looked at it for a moment with something that was not quite grief and not quite relief but lived between the two, the expression of someone looking at a piece of a very long story and knowing how many pages remain. "How many do you know about?" he said. "6 total, including himself," Harry said. "You've been working on the theory for at least a year, possibly longer. You identified the locket, the cup, the ring. I don't know where you are with those. The snake, probably. The diadem." He paused. "And me." The portraits on the walls were very quiet. Fawkes had not moved. Dumbledore looked at Harry over his glasses for a long moment. It was a look that had decades behind it, the accumulated weight of choices made and unmade, of a man who had spent his entire adult life making decisions about the fates of others with the best intentions and the most careful logic and the genuine, complicated love that was both his greatest quality and his most dangerous one. "You know," Dumbledore said. "I've known since April," Harry said. "Since the chamber at the end of first year. I felt the fragment in myself the moment I interfaced with the one in Quirrell. The resonance was identical. Like hearing the same note played on 2 different instruments. And you've said nothing. I was waiting to understand it before talking about it." Harry folded his hands in his lap. "I've had Shoko look at it." "Shoko. She's a medical practitioner. From Gojo's world. She's the best diagnostician I know." He watched Dumbledore absorb this. "She confirms the fragment. She confirms it's not integrated. It's been there since I was an infant and my own architecture has developed around it without incorporating it. The edges are distinct." Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the fire in the grate, which had been crackling steadily, seemed to settle into a lower register, as though it too was waiting. "You came to tell me you know," Dumbledore said. "I came to tell you that I'm going to handle it," Harry said. "Not your way. My way." Harry, your way requires me to die, Harry said. Not harshly. Plainly, the way you state a fact about the weather. Or to be close enough to death that the distinction doesn't matter practically. You've been building a plan around that endpoint for years, and it was built around a version of me that doesn't exist. He looked at the old man steadily. I'm not going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to remove the fragment from myself using the infinite void technique, and I'm going to do it when I understand the process well enough to do it without dying, which I will, because I have the framework and I have Shoko's diagnostic map and I have time. The silence was enormous. Dumbledore looked at him. The half-moon glasses reflected the fire. The portraits were very carefully not participating, which was a form of participation. The fragment, Dumbledore said, slowly, is connected to Voldemort. When the time comes, when the other anchors are destroyed and he is vulnerable, the fragment in you must be addressed for him to be truly defeated. If it is simply removed, it may retreat to him, Harry said. I know. Which is why I don't remove it until everything else is gone. The other Horcruxes first. His physical form made vulnerable. Then I remove the fragment from myself and the technique destroys it simultaneously. He tilted his head slightly. The void doesn't just remove things. It dissolves them. What I do to myself I do to the piece of him, and there's nowhere for it to retreat to if the other anchors are already gone. Dumbledore was very still. That's, he started. Theoretically sound, Harry said. Hermione has reviewed the framework. Gojo has reviewed the energy mechanics. Gojo knows. Gojo knows everything I know. Harry looked at him directly. He's been my guardian for 6 years. He's the strongest person I know. If there is something about this plan that won't work, he would have told me. Dumbledore sat back in his chair slightly. It was a small movement and it communicated something significant, the adjustment of a man whose internal model of a situation has shifted, not collapsed, but genuinely revised upward in the direction of someone else's capability. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're 11 years old." "Almost 12, Harry said. "Almost 12, Dumbledore repeated, and there was something in it that was not quite humor but brushed against it. He looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, not the strategic attention, not the planning attention, but something older and more personal, the attention of a man looking at something that matters to him and trying to see it honestly. "I have been afraid," Dumbledore said, "that the plan I made was the only plan possible. That the mathematics of the prophecy pointed in one direction and that direction had no alternatives." He was quiet. "I did not expect, I should have known, perhaps, but I did not expect, that the variable would do its own mathematics." "I'm not a variable," Harry said. "No," Dumbledore said. "You're not." He picked up the ruined diary again and turned it over. "Will you tell me what else you know? About the Horcruxes. What you've mapped." So Harry told him. Methodically, precisely, the way he described things to Gojo and Hermione and Shoko, not everything, because there were things he was still working through, but enough. The locket he'd found a reference to in Magic Most Evil. The cup connected to Helga Hufflepuff, likely hidden by a Horcrux-adjacent magical signature in a high-security location. The ring, which Dumbledore already knew about and which Harry had cross-referenced with Marvolo Gaunt's history through the Ministry records Hermione had accessed through a Freedom of Information pathway that technically existed. "The ring has a secondary enchantment," Harry said. "Not from Riddle. It's older. I can feel it from the description. It's cursed in a way that's separate from the Horcrux enchantment. If you try to use it, it'll kill you." Dumbledore went very still. Harry looked at him. "You've already found it," Harry said. A pause that was longer than it needed to be. "I have been searching." "Have you already touched it?" Another pause. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said, with the directness of someone who has decided to stop being careful about a specific subject. "Have you already put on the ring?" Dumbledore set down the diary. He looked at his right hand, which was resting on the desk, and he did something that took visible effort. He uncurled it from the natural curl it had settled into, straightened the fingers. The hand was blackened from the third finger down to the wrist, a specific, deep, structural darkening that had nothing to do with surface damage and everything to do with something working its way inward from the point of contact. Harry looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at the hand and felt the shape of what had been done to it with his energy sense, reading the structure of the curse the way he read everything, from the inside out, from the foundational logic of it outward to its effects. It was a death curse, literally, a piece of enchantment designed to propagate through the body from the point of contact and work inward until there was nothing working left. It was moving slowly. It was being contained, he thought, by some combination of Dumbledore's own immense power and possibly Fawkes's proximity and whatever medical intervention had been applied. But it was moving. How long? Harry said. A year, Dumbledore said. Perhaps a little more, with care. Harry sat with this. He felt the shape of a large, uncomfortable thing rearranging itself in his understanding of the situation, the picture of Dumbledore he'd been holding, the intelligent, long-planning, somewhat cold chess player using Harry as a piece, and the other picture, the one that was emerging now, of a man who had gone alone into a place with a death curse in it and come back dying, quietly, without telling anyone, and had continued planning as though the plan was still intact. You were going to keep going, Harry said. Yes. Without telling me. Without, you were going to die and still not tell me the whole plan because the plan requires me not to know all of it. Dumbledore looked at him. The plan was made before I understood what you were. But you understand now. A long moment. I am beginning to. Then change the plan, Harry said. Simply. Without anger, because anger would have been less effective than simplicity. Tell me everything. Where the remaining Horcruxes are, where you think they are, what you know about the snake, Nagini, and what you know about the prophecy. He held the old man's eyes. All of it. And in return I'll tell you how I'm going to handle the fragment in me, and you can tell me if the theory has gaps, and we can actually solve this together instead of you trying to solve it alone with a death curse working through your hand. The portraits were not pretending anymore. Several of them had leaned forward. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a very long time. Then he said, it would take more than one morning. I know, Harry said. I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. Not cracked, shifted, the way a very large piece of architecture shifts when the weight distribution changes. He looked at Harry with the full, undisguised attention of someone encountering something unexpected and choosing, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, to let the unexpected revise him rather than managing it from a distance. No, he said, quietly. I imagine you're not. They talked for 2 hours. The portraits listened without commenting, which was remarkable restraint for portraits. Fawkes made one sound, low and resonant, when Dumbledore described the full architecture of the Horcrux plan, and Harry noted that the bird looked at him with something in its orange eyes that he couldn't categorize but filed as significant. When Harry stood to leave, Dumbledore said, Gojo. Harry turned. He knows the whole of it. Yes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I should like to meet him. He'll come when it's time, Harry said. He tends to arrive at exactly the right moment. I'm not sure if that's skill or personality or just what happens when someone has his particular relationship with cause and effect. Dumbledore's mouth moved. You make him sound quite extraordinary. He's the strongest person in his world, Harry said. Which is a world that has things in it that would make most wizards considerably less composed. He looked at the door, then back. He also eats cold noodles over the sink and needs to be reminded to buy food. He's complicated. Most extraordinary people are, Dumbledore said. Harry left. He was halfway down the spiral staircase when he felt it, not danger, not threat, but a specific quality of attention, the kind that had weight. He stopped on the stairs and looked up. Dumbledore was at the top of the staircase, watching him go, with the expression of a man who has just revised something fundamental about himself and is in the early stages of not being sure how to carry the revision. He looked, Harry thought, older than he usually looked. Not weaker, older. Like the version of himself he might have been if he'd spent less of his life performing imperviousness. Harry nodded once. Dumbledore nodded back. Then Harry went down the stairs and out into the corridor and toward breakfast. The great hall was filling up with the usual morning chaos, owls arriving with the post, the smell of bacon and toast and the particular magical warmth of a room designed to feed a small city, the noise of several hundred people all needing coffee at the same time. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and took a piece of toast and a cup of tea and said nothing about the conversation for a moment, because it needed to settle before it became words. Ron lasted 30 seconds. Well. He knows everything, Harry said. And he's dying. He said it evenly. Slowly. From a cursed object. He has about a year. Hermione set down her cup with deliberate care. He went alone. Yes. Without telling anyone. Yes. Ron put both elbows on the table. That's very stupid, actually. For a man everyone says is very smart. He's been doing everything alone for years, Harry said. He's not used to, he paused, looking for the right word. He's not used to the plan having other people in it. Not real people. Not people who change the plan. Can Shoko help? Hermione said. Harry thought about it. I'll ask. He picked up his toast. The ring curse is specific and structural. If anyone can interface with it medically it's her. But she's not a miracle worker. She's just very, very good. Still, Hermione said. Still, Harry agreed. I'll ask. He sent the letter to Shoko that evening, from the Ollery, standing in the high cold of the tower with the smell of birds and wind and the castle below him full of its 1,000 daily events. The owl he used was a school owl, brown and reliable, and it took the letter with the professional demeanor of something that understood this was important and departed into the evening sky without drama. Harry leaned against the stone of the Ollery window and looked out at the grounds. He was thinking about the fragment inside himself. He'd been feeling it more clearly since the diary, not because it had grown, but because destroying a second Horcrux had been like removing one instrument from an orchestra and hearing the others more distinctly. The fragment in him was quiet. It had always been quiet. It sat in the center of his magical architecture with the specific quality of something that had been there so long it was almost ambient, almost architectural, almost like it belonged. He pressed his awareness into it, gently, the way you press a bruise to find its edges. The void technique responded, as it always did, by making the space around the fragment legible. He could feel the severed edge of it, the ragged cut where this piece of soul had been torn from a larger whole, and he could feel the way his own architecture had grown around it, not incorporating it, but accommodating it the way stone accommodates a fault line. Living around it. Developing despite it. What are you? The fragment didn't say, because it was inert, because it was a remnant and not a presence. But Harry asked anyway, quietly, to himself, what are you? He knew what it was. It was the residue of a choice made on Halloween 1981 in a house in Godric's Hollow, the moment a soul so divided it had lost its capacity for ordinary human response had fractured one more time on impact with a love so specific and so complete that it had become a structural force. The fragment wasn't Voldemort's evil. It was Voldemort's mistake. It was the piece that had ricocheted off his mother's death and found the nearest available space, which had been him. He felt something about this that he spent a moment examining before naming. It wasn't anger. It was closer to pity, the clean, non-sentimental kind. The recognition of something that had started out as a person with exceptional gifts and exceptional needs and had made a specific series of choices, each one logical from the previous one, each one narrowing the corridor until there was only one way forward and no way back, until what had started as a boy named Tom ended as a concept, a will, a name people were afraid to say. He didn't want to be afraid of it. he also didn't want to be cavalier about it. Both were wrong in opposite directions. He took the elder wand from his jacket and held it, feeling its resonance steady against his palm, the deep, patient frequency of something that had known many hands and had learned the difference between the ones it chose and the ones that took it. It had chosen him. Not because he was the most powerful, not yet, and possibly not ever in the terms the wand used historically, but because his power and his technique shared the same foundational logic as the wand's own structure. Space. Distance. The gap between what was and what is. He turned the wand over once. The fragment was manageable. He could handle it. The void would handle it when the time was right. But right now there were other things. The locket. The cup. The ring, which Dumbledore had already found and which Harry was going to need Shoko's help to address. The diadem somewhere in the castle, which Harry had been feeling since October as a specific resonance from the direction of the 7th floor, something old and enchanted and slightly wrong, sitting in a room that the castle seemed to have quietly redirected most human traffic away from. He pushed off the window ledge and walked back down into the castle. The 7th floor corridor was quiet at this hour, most students at dinner, the torches doing their flickering amber work on the stone. Harry walked its length twice, feeling with the void technique's active application, reading the spatial structure of the corridor and everything adjacent to it, until he found what he was looking for, a door that was not always a door, a room that the castle generated rather than maintained, a space that existed in the gap between real rooms and owed its existence to the accumulated human need for places to put things that had nowhere else to go. The room of requirement opened for him with the ease of something that recognized a genuine need when it felt one. Inside was everything. The accumulated decades of hidden things, the mountains of abandoned objects stretching into a darkness so far that the void technique had difficulty finding the far wall. Broken furniture, stacked boxes, the debris of generations. It smelled of dust and old wood and the specific sadness of things that had been important and were now forgotten. Harry stood in the entrance and cast his sense into the space and began reading the signatures. Most of the energy in the room was neutral, the background hum of objects that had once been magical and had mostly discharged or settled into their final states. But there was one signature, distinct and wrong and precise, sitting somewhere in the middle distance, approximately 40 yards into the room. He walked toward it. The diadem was on a stone bust that wore it with the expression busts typically wore, which was none, the object sitting on the stone head like a crown, like something someone had placed deliberately before they were supposed to and then forgotten. It was tarnished and obviously old and radiating the particular frequency of a soul fragment with the quiet persistence of a single radio tower in an empty landscape. Harry picked it up. 4, he thought. Including me, which doesn't count. 4 out of 7. He stood in the room of requirement with the diadem in his hands and the accumulated history of Hogwarts' hidden things around him and thought about the shape of the plan as it currently stood. 3 remaining external Horcruxes, if you counted Nagini. The locket, lost. The cup, hidden. Nagini, alive and beside Voldemort wherever Voldemort currently existed in his diminished state. His own fragment, the last one, to be addressed last. Dumbledore had a year. Maybe less. Harry had time, but not infinite time. The balance of it mattered. He pocketed the diadem. He turned to leave the room of requirement and found, in the doorway, Hermione Granger, who had apparently followed him with the quiet capability she brought to everything and was now standing in the entrance with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had arrived in time for the important part. The diadem, she said. Yes. You felt it. Since October. He held it up. Raven claws. It's been here the whole time. She came in. She looked at the diadem with the careful attention she brought to genuinely significant things, not touching it, reading the surface magic of it. How many does this make? 4. Plus the ring, which Dumbledore has already found and which we need Shoko's help with. Plus the locket, which is lost, and the cup, which is hidden. He looked at her. Plus Nagini. Plus me. She was quiet for a moment, doing her own count, running her own verification. "We need the sword," she said. Harry looked at her. "The sword of Gryffindor. It absorbed basilisk venom last night when you used the Fong. It's one of the only objects that can destroy a Horcrux. Anything imbued with basilisk venom can, and the sword absorbs substances that make it stronger." She met his eyes. "Dumbledore has it. Or access to it. He'll give it to us," Harry said. "After this morning, he'll give it to us." She nodded. She looked at the vast, impossible room around her, the mountains of forgotten things, the accumulated decades, the specific melancholy of a place that existed for things with nowhere else to go. "Harry," she said. "Yeah. Are you all right? About the piece of it, in you?" He looked at her. At the direct, careful question, the way it came without softening or inflation, asked with the same precision she brought to everything because she knew he'd find the precision more respectful than the softening. "Yes," he said. "You've known since April." "Yes. And you've been working on it," he said. "Which is the same as being all right, for me." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Okay. That's okay." She looked back at the room. "I'm going to need some time with the diadem's enchantment structure. There may be a secondary curse on it similar to what you described on the ring. Check for it before we try anything with the sword," Harry said. "Obviously." She looked at the diadem in his hand. "Can I?" He held it out. She took it with both hands, carefully, and felt the weight of it, and her eyes went slightly unfocused the way they did when she was reading something, whether a book or a magical signature or a room full of clues. It was always the same expression, the deep, unself-conscious engagement of someone who genuinely loved to understand things. "No secondary curse," she said, after a moment. "Just the fragment. It's very sad, actually." Harry looked at the diadem. At the way she was holding it, carefully, like something that had been important once and still deserved that. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They left the room of requirement together and the door stopped being a door behind them. They walked down the 7th-floor corridor in the direction of the smell of dinner from the great hall below, and Harry thought about Dumbledore's cursed hand and Shoko's diagnostic map and the locket that was lost somewhere and the cup that was hidden somewhere and the snake that was alive somewhere and the fragment inside himself that sat in the center of his architecture like a fault line, quiet and inert and waiting. He was not afraid of any of it. He was something more useful than unafraid, which was ready. The great hall, when they arrived, was at its Thursday evening best, the food hot, the noise comfortable, the enchanted sky doing something with October cloud and half-moon that was more atmospheric than astronomical. Ron had saved their seats and was working through a plate of roast potatoes with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had not eaten since lunch and had opinions about that. He looked up when they sat down. He saw the diadem in Hermione's bag. He looked at Harry. "Another one," he said. "Another one." He pointed at the potatoes. "Eat. Then you can tell me about it." Harry served himself and ate and the three of them talked quietly at the end of the Gryffindor table while the rest of the hall moved around them in its ordinary rhythm, and above them the enchanted October sky did what October skies did, which was look beautiful and slightly ominous in equal measure. Harry was halfway through his dinner when the owl arrived. It wasn't a school owl. It was a very fast, very sleek owl that Harry recognized because it was the bird Gojo had bought 2 summers ago specifically for long-distance correspondence, under the belief that ordinary post was for ordinary people and a man of his particular status should have a bird that communicated this. It landed in front of Harry with a firmness that suggested it had been flying for some time and was not interested in being kept waiting. Harry took the letter. He opened it. It was short. Gojo's handwriting, which was legible when he was focused on it and resembled a seismograph reading when he wasn't. This was legible. "Shoko got your letter. She says she can look at the hand. Also, I'm coming to see the school because I heard there was a basilisk and you didn't tell me there was a basilisk. Not upset. Just interested." And I'll be there by Friday. Harry looked at the letter. He looked at the owl. He gave the owl a piece of chicken from his plate, which it accepted with dignity. What? Ron said. Gojo's coming on Friday, Harry said. To Hogwarts? Yes. Does Dumbledore know? He will, Harry said. Hermione, reading over his shoulder, Shoko's coming too. Apparently. To look at Dumbledore's hand. Yes. Harry. Did you arrange for a non-wizarding medical practitioner to come to Hogwarts to treat the headmaster's cursed hand without telling the headmaster? I told him about Shoko this morning, Harry said. He expressed interest in meeting Gojo. The rest is logistics. Hermione pressed her mouth together in the way she did when she decided that the outcome of a plan justified the methodology but still had professional feelings about the methodology. Fine, she said. Fine. Is Gojo, what is Gojo? Ron said. I know he's your guardian and he taught you everything and he's very powerful but, he's the strongest sorcerer in the world, Harry said. In his world. Which is a world that has things in it that, he paused, trying to find the simplification that conveyed the essential information. Have you ever wondered what it would look like if someone was born with so much power that nothing could touch them, and then spent their whole life getting stronger anyway, just because they could? Ron thought about this. That sounds a bit terrifying, actually. He also cries at sentimental films and eats all the snacks before you get to them, Harry said. So it balances out. Ron looked at him. Then he started laughing, the deep genuine laugh he produced when something had genuinely landed, and the sound of it was warm in the noisy hall, and Hermione's expression moved from professional forbearance to actual amusement, and Harry ate his dinner and watched the enchanted sky and felt the week settling around him into its final shape. Gojo arrived at Hogwarts on Friday morning at precisely 11:47, which Harry noted was the same time he'd arrived at Privet Drive on that October night 6 years ago, which was probably not intentional and was definitely Gojo's nature expressing itself spatially. He came through the main gates on foot, which was unusual, because Gojo's relationship with the concept of walking from point A to point B was generally theoretical. He was wearing his usual, black jacket, white hair, the round white sunglasses that Harry had never once seen him remove outdoors. He had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the castle with the expression he used for things he found genuinely interesting, which was subtly different from the expression he used for things he found merely impressive. Beside him, Shoko walked with the unhurried precision that meant she had already been briefed on the situation and had formed her assessment and was now moving toward implementation. She carried a bag that looked ordinary and was not ordinary at all. Harry met them at the gate. He had come alone again, same reasoning as with Dumbledore, some meetings needed to be managed before they became events. He stood at the gate as it opened and Gojo walked through and looked at him with the 6 years of knowing quality that meant he was doing his own assessment and it was taking approximately 3 seconds. You're taller, Gojo said. 4 centimeters since September, Harry said. Are you eating properly? Better than you. Gojo pointed at Shoko, who was already walking up the path. She made me meal plans. I know. I asked her to. They have vegetables in them. Yes, Harry said. That's how they work. Gojo looked at him for another moment. Then he reached out and put a hand on Harry's head, briefly, the way he sometimes did, the gesture that had no name but that Harry had filed a long time ago under category, this person is glad I exist. Then he took his hand back and put it in his pocket and said, show me this school. Harry showed him the school. Not a tour, Harry didn't do tours, and Gojo didn't do tours, and Shoko was already halfway to the hospital wing through some navigational instinct that suggested she'd gotten the layout from sources Harry hadn't checked. He walked with Gojo through the main corridors and up the moving staircases and past the portraits that watched them both with the specific attention of painted beings encountering someone who exceeded their frame of reference. Gojo looked at everything with the genuine, unhurried interest he brought to places that had earned it. He stopped in front of one of the staircases that was in the process of moving. He watched it complete its rotation. He looked at the engineering of the enchantment with his head tilted and his energy sense extended. Spatial charm, he said. Persistent one, Harry said. It's been running for about 400 years. The margin of control on this is impressive, Gojo said. Whoever built it understood the difference between mechanical and organic spatial manipulation. He paused. Did a human being build this? Several, over time. Each headmaster adds to it. Gojo looked around at the castle. It's alive, he said. Not like a person. But not like a person either. That's what I said. He put his hands back in his pockets. Where's Dumbledore? His office. He's expecting you. How? I sent him a note this morning. Gojo looked at him. You told Dumbledore I was coming and you didn't tell me you told him. I told you he'd expressed interest in meeting you. You told me. Gojo stopped. His expression moved through something that landed on amused. You managed both ends of that without either of us realizing it. I told you both true things, Harry said. You both acted on them. You're getting better at that. I learned from someone. Gojo started toward where Harry had indicated the headmaster's office was. Harry fell into step beside him. They walked for a moment in the comfortable silence that was the specific register of their relationship at its best, not empty, not performative, just two people who had spent enough time together that silence carried its own communication. The fragment, Gojo said. Steady. Same as Shoko described. You felt it more clearly after the diary. Yes. It's distinct. The edges are exactly where she said they were. The void technique? Ready. I've been developing the precision of it since April. The interface in the diary chamber, the amplification, I think I understand the mechanics of it now. Harry paused. It's like the wand and the technique are the same thing from different angles. When they both apply to the same target simultaneously, the resolution is total. Gojo was quiet for a moment. Then, show me the theory. Tonight. After Shoko looks at Dumbledore. Fine. He looked ahead at the gargoyle that guarded the headmaster's staircase. Is the old man going to be difficult? He was this morning, Harry said. Then he wasn't. What changed? He revised his model of the situation. Because of you. Because he's actually smart enough to revise things when they stop working, Harry said. He's been alone with the plan for so long he forgot that was a choice. Once he remembered it was a choice he chose differently. He looked at the gargoyle. He's a good person who made bad plans. That's fixable. Gojo looked at him. The gargoyle looked at Gojo with the expression gargoyles used for people they couldn't categorize. Licorice wand, Harry said to the gargoyle, which moved aside. They went up. The meeting between Satoru Gojo and Albus Dumbledore lasted 4 hours. Harry was present for the first 30 minutes, which contained the introductions and the initial establishing of what each party knew and what each party could do and what each party's position was. He watched the two most powerful people he knew in their respective worlds take each other's measure with the mutual respect of beings that had rarely in their lives encountered something they needed to assess carefully, and was finding it now, and was calibrated enough to be honest about that. Dumbledore looked at Gojo with the attention of a man who had met many powerful people and was finding that the category he'd placed Gojo in before the meeting needed revision. Gojo looked at Dumbledore with the attention he used for genuinely interesting things, present, specific, not performing anything. After the first 5 minutes Gojo said, "Your hand." Dumbledore looked at his right hand. He uncurled it as he had for Harry, the blackened fingers straightening with the effort it required, and held it out. Gojo looked at it. He reached out and held his own hand 2 inches above Dumbledore's, not touching, and extended his energy sense into the curse with the focused precision of someone who was not a medical practitioner and was nevertheless extremely good at reading the structure of things. That's an unraveling curse, he said. It's attacking the connective tissue of the magical architecture rather than the physical body. The physical damage is downstream of the magical damage. He looked at Dumbledore. How long have you been containing it? Since spring, Dumbledore said. With what? A combination of my own constitution and, he indicated Fox, who trilled once. Phoenix tears slow it, Gojo said. They're buying you time. How much time Shoko can buy you beyond that depends on what the curse is anchored to. The ring. She's going to need the ring. It's at my house, Dumbledore said. Godric's Hollow. We can get it after, Gojo said, as though this was a simple logistical note. Dumbledore looked at him. Godric's Hollow is, I know what it is, Gojo said. I read everything Harry sent me. The house, the graves, the whole story. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I'll get the ring. It won't touch me. Harry watched Dumbledore process the statement "it won't touch me" from Gojo's mouth, which was a statement that required either enormous arrogance or an accurate understanding of one's own ability, and Dumbledore was old enough to know the difference. Infinity, Harry said quietly, to Dumbledore. Ah, Dumbledore said. And then, after a moment, with something that was clearly genuine, I see. Harry excused himself after 30 minutes, because the conversation was going to go into technical territory that required Shoko and because there were things he wanted to do while the adults compared notes. He went to find Ron and Hermione. They were in the library, Hermione at a table with the diadem in front of her and 3 reference books open, Ron in the next chair reading the Quidditch section of the Prophet with the specific dedication of someone maintaining their sanity through familiar ritual. They both looked up when Harry came in. How did it go? Hermione said. Gojo's going to get the ring, Harry said. Shoko's going to treat the curse. Dumbledore's cooperating. Ron put down the paper. Just like that? Not just like that. 4 hours of conversation. Harry sat down. But yes. Hermione looked at the diadem. She had it positioned on a cloth in the center of the table and had drawn a diagram of its enchantment structure beside it with annotations in her precise, dense handwriting. I've mapped the Horcrux enchantment on this one. It's the same base structure as the diary but older and more settled. It should respond to basilisk venom the same way. We'll need the sword, Harry said. Dumbledore will give it to us, she said, which was Harry's phrase from 2 days ago coming back in her voice. Yes, Harry said. He will. Ron looked at the diadem. He looked at it with the expression he'd been developing all year, the one that was less what is happening and more I understand what is happening and I'm deciding how to feel about it. He said, are we going to go through the whole list? All of them? The 3 of us? Yes, Harry said. Including the one in you. Yes. Walk me through that part again, Ron said. The plan for that. Harry walked him through it. Ron listened with the same attention he'd given to the original explanation and at the end he said, and the bit where you don't die. The void technique handles that. Yes. And Gojo has checked this. Yes. And Shoko has checked this. Yes. And Hermione reviewed the theoretical framework in August and extended it, Hermione said, without looking up from her diagram. Ron sat with this for a moment. Then he picked up the Prophet again and said, right. The cannons have got a new keeper, did you see? Completely wrong choice, their defense problem is spatial not structural, Harry said. Their keeper's positioning is fine. The issue is the chaser's pattern in the final 30 yards. Ron pointed at him. That. Yes. He turned the page. Finally, someone who understands. Hermione made a sound that communicated fond exasperation with the specific precision of someone who had been communicating it for 2 years and had developed a rich vocabulary for it. Harry smiled. He sat between the two of them in the library while afternoon light came through the high windows and laid long gold rectangles across the stone floor, and Hermione made notes on the diadem structure, and Ron explained the canon's spatial problem in terms that were correct and enthusiastic and occasionally wrong about specific things, and Harry listened and argued and was in both conversations simultaneously the way he always was, and felt the day settling around him into its actual shape. Not a dramatic shape. Not the shape that prophecies suggested or plans required. Just this, the library, the gold light, the people who decided he was worth being beside, the wand against his chest with its deep patient resonance, the fragment inside him quiet and manageable and already accounted for. Gojo found him there at 4 o'clock, appearing in the library doorway with a piece of shortbread from Dumbledore's personal biscuit tin, which he was eating without apparent guilt. "Did he offer you that?" Harry said. "He offered me tea." The biscuit was adjacent to the tea. "That's not the same as being offered it." "He didn't say I couldn't have it," Gojo said, and came in and sat in the empty chair across from Ron with the ease of someone who had never once in their life worried about whether they were intruding. Ron looked at him. Gojo looked at Ron. "Ron Weasley," Harry said. "Satoru Gojo," Gojo said, in the same tone he'd used when he'd first said his own name to a 5-year-old on a Surrey Park bench, which was the tone of someone who considered their name sufficient introduction. Ron said, "Harry says you eat cold noodles over a sink." Gojo looked at Harry. Harry looked at the ceiling. "Only when I've run out of other food," Gojo said. "Right," Ron said, apparently satisfied by this as an establishing character fact. "He also says you're the strongest person in your world." "Yes." "Is that," Ron paused, choosing his words. "Is that like how Harry's going to be the strongest person in our world?" Gojo looked at Harry. Harry looked at the window. "Bit different," Gojo said. "I was born with it. Harry built it. He finished the shortbread. That's actually better." Ron looked between them. Then he said, "Hermione, put the diagram down for a second." Hermione put her pen down. "I just want to say," Ron said, to the table at large, with the directness of someone who had decided the thing needed saying, "that whatever happens with the Horcruxes and Voldemort and all of it, this lot," he gestured in a way that included Harry, Hermione, Gojo, and abstractly Shoko somewhere in the hospital wing, "is the most terrifying group of people I've ever been in a room with, and I'm really glad I'm on this side." A pause. "Me too," Hermione said, which from her was a complete sentence. Gojo looked at Ron for a moment with the expression he used for people he'd just decided had earned something. Then he said, "You play chess." "I'm the best in the school." Gojo reached into his jacket and produced a travel chess set that he had absolutely not had when he walked into the library and whose provenance Harry decided not to examine. "Show me." Ron leaned forward with the expression of someone who had been challenged and had not yet realized the challenge was actually a compliment. Harry watched them set up the board. He watched Hermione go back to her diagram with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose evening had been resolved into exactly the right configuration. He felt the castle around him, old and breathing and full of the accumulated weight of all the children it had ever held, all the things it had ever witnessed, all the mornings it had let in through its high windows and all the nights it had sheltered against its stone walls. He was 12 years old. He had the Elder Wand against his chest and a Horcrux inside him that was accounted for and a plan that was real and friends who were here and a guardian who was in the next room eating borrowed biscuits and proposing to demolish the best chess player in Hogwarts for his own entertainment. He had, he thought, exactly what he needed. Not everything. Not yet. There was work remaining, the locket, lost, the cup, hidden, Nagini, alive, the fragment in himself, Voldemort, wherever Voldemort was gathering himself for the next attempt. There was Dumbledore's cursed hand and the months or year it bought them. There were plans to refine and theories to test and conversations with Shoko about precision and conversations with Dumbledore about the full shape of the remaining Horcruxes and conversations with himself about how exactly to approach the moment when the void technique turned inward and resolved what had been living in him since he was a year old. There was all of that. But tonight there was also this, the gold light through the library windows going amber as the sun dropped, and Ron loudly declaring check after his third move while Gojo ate another piece of shortbread with the composure of someone sandbagging, and Hermione making a small, satisfied sound as her diagram resolved itself into a clean theoretical map, and Harry sitting with his back against the window and his feet on the chair and the whole complicated, enormous, completely manageable shape of the future arranged before him like a problem he'd already decided to solve. He was not afraid. He was not hiding. He was exactly what he was, built from 6 years of cold noodles and star-watching and beanbag sessions in a Shinjuku flat and 4 kinds of soup at 1 in the morning, from the careful reconstruction of a person who had been told he was nothing and had decided, quietly and without making a fuss about it, that this was someone else's information and he wasn't keeping it. He was Harry Potter. He pressed his thumb along the Elder Wand, felt it answer, felt the infinite void settle around him like something that had always been his shape. Outside, the last of the afternoon light touched the surface of the lake and scattered, and the castle breathed, and October finished itself with the particular grace of months that know exactly what they are. And in the library on the 7th floor of a 1,000-year-old school, the future arranged itself around a 12-year-old boy who was neither afraid of it nor impatient for it, who understood that the space between where he was and where he was going was not empty but full of time, full of choice, full of everything that had not yet happened and was already, in some deep structural sense, already decided. He was ready.